I came home with a woman. My wife yelled, "Who is she? What's going on?" We walked in silently and smiled. "Meet the wife of your boss and your lover," I said. My wife froze. You ever notice how marriages don't end with fireworks? They don't go out in some blaze of glory with thrown dishes and screaming matches that the neighbors call the cops about. Nah, that's Hollywood garbage. Real marriages die like houseplants nobody remembers to water, slow, quiet, and with just enough guilt to make you feel like crap when you finally notice the brown leaves. Mine started its death spiral in the kitchen on a Tuesday, which feels about right because Tuesdays are the emotional equivalent of gas station sushi. Nothing good ever happens on a Tuesday. She was doing dishes, which sounds domestic and sweet until you realize she was scrubbing the same plate for about 5 minutes like she was trying to erase evidence of a crime. I walked up behind her, reached out to touch her shoulder. You know, that casual thing you do when you've been married long enough that words feel optional. And she flinched. Not like a little twitch, but a full-body recoil like I'd just tried to hand her a live grenade. She pulled away so fast you'd think I was radioactive, like my touch came with a Surgeon General's warning and a list of side effects that included nausea, regret, and the sudden urge to fake your own death. "Not in the mood," she said, her voice flat as Kansas and about twice as boring. Again, that word hung in the air between us like a fart nobody wants to acknowledge, but everyone can smell. Not in the mood. The universal get-out-of-intimacy-free card that women have been playing since the invention of marriage itself. I should have printed it on a t-shirt and worn it around the house just to save her the trouble of saying it every damn day. No fight, no tears, no passionate argument about feelings or needs or any of that therapy talk nonsense that Dr. Phil gets paid millions to spew. Just cold air, colder silence, and a dish towel she folded with the kind of precision usually reserved for origami masters or people trying really hard not to make eye contact. She worked that towel like it was a Rubik's Cube, and if she got it just right, she'd unlock the secret level where she didn't have to acknowledge my existence. I stood there watching her, and I swear to God, I had this moment of crystal clear clarity that hits you like a brick to the skull. The kind of realization that makes you wonder if this is what people mean when they talk about enlightenment. Except instead of finding inner peace, you just find out you've been playing yourself for months. I thought, wow, love really does come with a warranty these days, doesn't it? Except mine apparently expired somewhere between "I do" and "I don't give a damn anymore." And nobody bothered to send me the renewal notice. I didn't argue. What's the point? Arguing with someone who's already checked out emotionally is like trying to reason with a brick wall. Except the brick wall has better listening skills and doesn't sigh dramatically every time you open your mouth. So instead, I just stood there like an idiot, hands at my sides, watching my wife treat basic human affection like it was some kind of communicable disease she might catch if she got too close. Right then and there, I wrote myself a mental note, the kind that burns itself into your brain in neon letters you can't ignore even if you tried. Stop reaching for people who treat your touch like a tax. Stop begging for crumbs of affection from someone who acts like giving you basic human decency is equivalent to donating a kidney. Stop playing yourself, Mason, because you're better than this discount bin version of love they sell at the marriage clearance sale. That night, lying in our bed that felt more like a demilitarized zone than a place of intimacy, I stared at the ceiling and listened to her breathe on the other side of our king-sized relationship graveyard. She was facing away from me, of course, because God forbid we accidentally make eye contact in the dark and have to acknowledge that we were two people slowly suffocating under the weight of pretending everything was fine. The space between us felt like the Grand Canyon, except less scenic and more depressing. And that's when it hit me, the plan. Not some dramatic revenge scheme involving burning her clothes or slashing tires or any of that Psycho X nonsense that lands you in jail or on a daytime talk show. Nah, I'm classier than that. More calculated. I started planning my quiet revenge right there in the dark, and let me tell you something. Quiet revenge is the best kind of revenge. It's the aged whiskey of payback, smooth, sophisticated, and it only gets better with time. I wasn't going to yell or cry or beg her to love me like some pathetic rom-com protagonist who thinks grand gestures fix fundamental incompatibility. I wasn't going to chase someone who clearly didn't want to be caught. I was going to do something way more devastating. I was going to stop caring. I was going to reclaim my dignity, my sanity, and my damn self-respect, and I was going to do it so smoothly, she wouldn't even see it coming until it was too late. See, most people think revenge is about hurting the other person, making them feel the pain you felt, evening some cosmic score like life's a basketball game and you're down by 20 points. But that's amateur hour. Real revenge, the kind that actually means something, is about becoming so completely unbothered, so thoroughly moved on, so absolutely fine without them that their absence becomes irrelevant. It's about reaching a point where they could walk back in your life and you'd feel nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a mild, "Oh, it's you," like they're the mailman dropping off bills. I rolled over, pulled the blanket up, and smiled in the dark. Not a bitter smile or a sad smile, but a genuine, I just figured out the cheat code to this video game kind of smile. Tomorrow, I'd start making moves. Small ones at first, nothing she'd notice right away because she was too busy not noticing me anyway. But they'd add up. They'd compound like interest on a savings account I'd been neglecting for way too long. The flinch before the fire, that's what this was. That moment when you pull your hand back right before you touch the hot stove because your survival instincts kick in and scream, "Abort mission, dumbass." She flinched away from me tonight. Yeah, but I was about to flinch away from this whole dying marriage before it burned me any worse than it already had. And the best part? She had no idea the clock had just started ticking. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes from a full night's sleep next to someone who pretends you don't exist. It's liberating in a weird way, like finally admitting to yourself that the restaurant you've been defending for years actually has terrible food, and you've just been lying to yourself because you didn't want to admit you wasted all that time and money. I rolled out of bed, grabbed my phone, and decided that today was the day I'd stop playing house with someone who clearly moved out emotionally about 6 months ago, but forgot to tell her body to follow. I made breakfast. Real breakfast, not that grab a granola bar and run garbage we've been doing for months. I'm talking eggs, bacon, toast, the whole production that makes your kitchen smell like someone actually gives a damn about starting the day right. She wandered in around 7:30 wearing that ratty purple robe that had seen better days sometime during the Bush administration, the first one, probably. Her hair was doing that thing where it defied gravity and logic simultaneously, and she had her phone clutched in her hand like it was a life preserver, and she was drowning in a sea of our failed marriage. "Morning," I said, sliding eggs onto a plate with the kind of domestic competence that would make those cooking show hosts weep with pride. I even folded the bacon into a little smile shape because I'm petty like that and wanted to show her what happiness looked like since she clearly forgot. She grunted, actually grunted, like some kind of cave person who just discovered fire and wasn't impressed. She grabbed her coffee, which I'd made, by the way, because I'm a saint, and scrolled through her phone with the intensity of someone either planning world domination or shopping for throw pillows online. With her, it could honestly go either way. "So," I said, sitting down across from her with my own plate, "I was thinking we could do something Friday night. Maybe that Italian place you like? The one with the breadsticks that are basically just butter delivery systems." I was testing the waters, seeing if there was any sign of life in this relationship or if I was basically married to a really expensive roommate who hogged the bathroom. She didn't even look up. "Can't do Friday night. I'm busy," she said, her voice flat as a pancake that someone left on the griddle too long. Busy. That magic word that means absolutely nothing and everything at the same time. Busy with what, exactly? I wanted to ask. Busy folding lies into neat little squares and stacking them in whatever dark corner of your conscience you keep that thing? Busy pretending our marriage isn't circling the drain like hair in a shower that needs cleaning? Busy with what? I asked anyway, because apparently I enjoy pain and redundant conversations. "Groceries," she said, like she'd just dropped some classified government intel, and I should be impressed by her commitment to national security through produce shopping. Groceries. On a Friday night. At what, 7 p.m.? Who does groceries on Friday night unless they're either lying or have the social life of a lint roller? I wanted to call her out right there, wanted to say something like, "Really, groceries? That's the best you could come up with?" But I didn't. Instead, I just nodded and took a bite of my eggs, which suddenly tasted like disappointment with a side of, what am I doing with my life? That's when I made my second executive decision in less than 24 hours. I stood up, grabbed my plate, and said, "You know what? I'm moving to the guest room." She looked up for the first time all morning, and I could see the little wheels turning in her head trying to figure out if this was a problem or a convenience. What? What? Because sharing a bed with someone who acts like I've got the plague seems kind of pointless, don't you think? I said it calm, no drama, just stating facts like I was reading the weather report. Plus, new arrangement starting today. Your bills, my bills, shared list for house stuff. I'm not your wallet with legs anymore. Her face went through about 15 emotions in 3 seconds. Surprise, anger, confusion, and what I think might have been relief, though she'd rather eat glass than admit that. That's so dramatic, Mason, she said, pulling out that word like it was some kind of trump card that automatically won arguments. No, honey, I said, putting my plate in the sink and turning to face her with the kind of smile you give someone when you're done playing their games. Titanic was dramatic. The ship sank, people died. Leo couldn't fit on that door even though there was clearly room. That was dramatic. I gestured between us like I was a game show host revealing the grand prize of mutual dysfunction. This is just accounting. This is me finally balancing the books on a relationship that's been operating in the red for way too long. She opened her mouth to say something. Probably something about how I was being unreasonable or difficult or whatever adjective she'd picked up from her weekly brunch crew, who all thought their husbands were the problem too. But I was already walking away, coffee in hand, dignity somewhat intact, heading to the guest room to start my new life as the world's most organized, separated but still technically married man. At work that day, I must have looked different because my buddy Jerry took one look at me in the break room and said, "You look like a man who just signed a peace treaty with his sanity." Jerry's one of those guys who's been divorced twice and somehow came out the other side more well-adjusted than most people who've never been married. He's like a war veteran, but for relationships, and his advice usually involves bourbon and brutal honesty in equal measures. Something like that, I said, pouring myself what had to be my 4th coffee of the day, which probably wasn't healthy, but neither was my marriage, so we were all making questionable choices here. She finally push you over the edge? Jerry asked, leaning against the counter with his own mug that said, "World's okayest employee," because Jerry understood the power of managing expectations. More like I finally realized I was standing on the edge holding her hand while she was trying to figure out how to push me off without getting blamed for it. I said, "So I just let go." Jerry nodded slowly, like I'd just shared some profound wisdom instead of just basic self-preservation. That's growth right there, man. Most guys hang on until they're nothing but a shell of themselves, walking around like zombies in their own lives. You're getting out before you need a support group and a prescription. He wasn't wrong. I could feel it already. That lightness that comes from finally making a decision instead of just floating in limbo, hoping things magically fix themselves. Hope is a terrible strategy, by the way. Hope is what you do when you're too scared to actually change anything. So you just wish really hard and pretend that counts as effort. Guest room, separate finances, and I'm done being her emotional punching bag, I said, ticking off my new boundaries like I was reading a grocery list, which felt appropriate given her Friday night plans. "Good man," Jerry said, raising his mug in a toast. "Welcome to the land of the living. It's pretty nice here. We have standards and self-respect. You're gonna like it." I clinked my mug against his and took a sip of coffee that somehow tasted better than it had 5 minutes ago. Maybe it was the caffeine finally kicking in, or maybe it was just the taste of freedom mixed with French roast. Either way, I was already feeling like a different person than the guy who'd reached for his wife's shoulder last night only to get treated like a biohazard. That night, I set up the guest room properly, my clothes in the closet, my books on the nightstand, my phone charger within reach. It felt like moving into a studio apartment inside my own house, which was depressing and liberating at the same time. She didn't say anything about it, didn't even acknowledge the change, which told me everything I needed to know. I lay there that night in my new bed, staring at a different ceiling, and realized something important. I wasn't sad. I was relieved, and that relief tasted better than any fake reconciliation ever could. Saturday rolled around like it had nowhere better to be, and apparently we had plans I'd completely forgotten about because my brain had been too busy processing the dumpster fire that was my marriage. Tom and Dana's barbecue. The annual summer thing they did where everyone pretended their lives were Instagram perfect while drinking beer that cost more than it should and eating burgers that were somehow always slightly undercooked in the middle. I would have bailed, honestly. But my wife informed me at 10 in the morning that we were going and that I should try to be social for once, which was rich coming from someone who'd been treating me like furniture for the past 6 months. We drove there in silence, which had become our default setting lately. The kind of silence that's so thick you could cut it with a knife, bottle it, and sell it as essence of failed marriage at one of those fancy stores where everything costs too much and smells like lies and lavender. She stared out the window like the passing scenery was the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen, and I focused on the road while mentally calculating how long I had to stay before it became socially acceptable to fake a work emergency. Tom and Dana's place was exactly what you'd expect from a couple who made doing brunch their entire personality. Perfectly manicured lawn, string lights that probably cost more than my first car, and a grill that looked like it could double as a spaceship if Tom ever decided to abandon suburban life and explore the cosmos. There were already about 15 people there, all holding drinks and laughing at jokes that probably weren't that funny, but sounded hilarious after 3 beers and the collective agreement to pretend everyone's life was going great. "Mason, hey buddy," Tom called out, waving a spatula like he was directing traffic. Tom was one of those guys who wore cargo shorts year-round and thought saying "living the dream" was a personality trait. Nice enough guy, but about as deep as a kiddie pool. "Hey Tom," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. My wife had already disappeared into the house with Dana and 2 other women whose names I could never remember, but who all seemed to share the same haircut and opinion about everything. I grabbed a beer from the cooler, something craft with a label that looked like it was designed by someone who took a lot of mushrooms, and planted myself near the grill where at least I could look occupied. Jerry was there too, because apparently the universe knew I'd need backup, and he gave me a knowing nod that said, "I see you're in hell, hang in there." Everything was fine for about 45 minutes. I made small talk with some guy named Brad or Chad or something equally douchey who worked in finance and wouldn't shut up about his boat. I nodded in the right places, laughed when it seemed appropriate, and generally played the part of normal functioning human at social event. Then my wife came back outside with her little entourage, and I could tell by the look on her face that she was about to do something that would make me regret not faking that work emergency. She was holding a wine glass, her third, if I was counting correctly, which I was, and had that particular smile that women get when they're about to throw someone under a bus, but make it sound like a joke. I've seen that smile before. It never ends well. "So Mason's been going through a bit of a phase lately," she announced to the group, her voice carrying across the patio like she was narrating a nature documentary about an endangered species. Everyone's attention shifted to me like I was suddenly the main attraction at a zoo nobody asked to visit. I felt my jaw tighten, but kept my face neutral. "Oh yeah," I said, taking a sip of my beer and praying for a meteor strike. "Yeah, he's gotten really into self-help stuff," she continued, doing this little laugh that was supposed to sound affectionate, but came out condescending. "Reading all these books about boundaries and self-care and feelings. It's very..." She paused, searching for the word like she was picking out produce. "Emotional. He's become very emotional." A few people chuckled, that uncomfortable laugh people do when they don't know if something's funny or if they're witnessing a murder in slow motion. Jerry looked at me with wide eyes that clearly said, "Abort, abort, abort." But I was already past the point of no return. "He's in a self-help phase," she said again, really driving it home now. Bless his heart. And there it was, bless his heart, the Southern woman's way of saying, what a pathetic loser, while maintaining plausible deniability. She might as well have patted me on the head and given me a participation trophy for trying to have basic human dignity. Something in me just snapped. Not in a dramatic, throw things kind of way, but in a quiet, I'm done with this performance kind of way. I started laughing. Really laughing. The kind of genuine laugh that comes from the absurdity of realizing you've been playing yourself, and everyone just watched it happen in real time. Everyone stared at me like I'd just started speaking in tongues. My wife's smile faltered, probably because this wasn't the reaction she'd expected. She wanted me to shrink, to look embarrassed, to prove her point about me being too emotional or whatever narrative she was selling to justify treating me like garbage. Instead, I stood up, set my beer down on the table with the kind of deliberate care you use when you're about to do something you can't take back, and smiled at Tom and Dana. "Tom, Dana, thanks for the burgers," I said, my voice calm and clear. "They were great. Really great." But my therapist. Yeah, I have one of those now. Isn't that wild? My therapist says I shouldn't eat where I'm disrespected. Something about digestion and stress. Very scientific. The patio went so quiet you could hear someone's ice cubes melting 3 yards away. Tom looked like he wanted to crawl into his fancy grill and become one with the charcoal. Dana's mouth was literally hanging open, catching flies and regrets. My wife's face went through more colors than a sunset. Mason, don't be dramatic, she hissed, which was apparently her favorite word lately, like she'd bought it in bulk from some Costco of manipulative phrases. Dramatic? I said, turning to look at her with the kind of calm that comes from finally being done with someone's bullshit. Drama's what happens when you mix boredom with bad manners. I gestured around at the assembled crowd who were all pretending they suddenly found their shoes fascinating. This is just me having standards. Novel concept, I know. I grabbed my keys from my pocket and started walking toward the gate. Behind me, I could hear my wife saying something about me being ridiculous, about how I was embarrassing her, about how I was making a scene. But here's the thing about being called dramatic by someone who's been staging a one-woman show of emotional manipulation for months. It loses its power real quick. Mason, wait, she called out, her voice sharp with embarrassment and anger. I turned around one last time, right at the gate, and looked at her standing there on Tom and Dana's perfect patio with her wine glass and her audience, and her carefully constructed image of being the reasonable one in our marriage. You know what's dramatic? I said, publicly humiliating your husband at a barbecue because you're too much of a coward to just admit you checked out of this marriage months ago. That's dramatic. Me leaving? That's just self-respect. Learn the difference. Then I walked out, leaving her holding a paper plate loaded with potato salad and her pride, both of which were probably going to be hard to swallow. I could hear the murmur of confused voices behind me. People probably asking if I was okay, if we were okay, trying to figure out what just happened and whose side they were supposed to take in whatever divorce announcement just got broadcast at their nice suburban barbecue. I got in my car, started the engine, and sat there for a second, hands on the steering wheel, waiting for the regret to hit me. Waiting for that feeling of, oh God, what did I just do, that usually follows any public confrontation. But it never came. Instead, I felt lighter, like I'd just put down a backpack full of rocks I didn't realize I'd been carrying. My phone buzzed. Jerry, dude. That was the most badass thing I've ever seen. You good? Me. Never better. That's probably a lie, but I'm working on it. Jerry, beer later? Me, absolutely. I drove home alone, windows down, radio playing some song I didn't know the words to but hummed anyway. And somewhere between Tom and Dana's place and my driveway, I realized something important. I wasn't her background extra anymore. I wasn't the supporting character in her story, the husband prop she could mock for cheap laughs while her friends nodded along. I was the main character in my own life now, and that felt pretty damn good. A few days after the barbecue incident, which had apparently made the rounds in our social circle faster than a celebrity death hoax, I was driving home from work when I saw it. Her car. That silver SUV she'd insisted we needed because apparently sedans were for people without ambition, or whatever the car salesman had convinced her of while I stood there wondering why we were dropping 40 grand on a vehicle that would spend most of its life shuttling one person to Target and back. It was parked outside Catalyst Coffee, this pretentious place downtown where they charged $7 for coffee and acted like they were doing you a favor by serving it in a mug that looked like it was made by someone's nephew in pottery class. Not her usual spot. She was a Starbucks girl through and through, the kind who ordered drinks with so many modifications the baristas probably drew straws to see who had to take her order. So seeing her car there was already weird, like spotting a vegan at a steakhouse or a politician telling the truth. I should have driven past. I should have minded my own business and gone home to my guest room and my new life of peaceful separation. But here's the thing about marriage. Even when it's dying, even when you're pretty sure it's already dead and you're just waiting for someone to call time of death, there's still this sick curiosity that makes you want to know. Like watching a car crash in slow motion. You know it's going to be bad, but you can't look away. I pulled into a spot across the street, far enough away that I wasn't obvious, but close enough to see through the massive windows that hipster coffee shops apparently require by law. And there she was, sitting at one of those reclaimed wood tables that probably cost more than my first apartment's rent, laughing. Actually laughing. The real kind. Not that polite chuckle she'd been giving me for months that sounded like someone remembering how laughing was supposed to work, but forgetting why. She wasn't alone. There was a guy sitting across from her. Mid-40s, probably, with that distinguished gray-at-the-temples thing that men apparently get to have, while women are expected to die away any evidence of aging. Nice watch. I could see it glinting from across the street, the kind of watch that screams, "I make six figures and want everyone to know it." Decent suit, though he'd taken off the jacket and rolled up his sleeves like he was in some cologne commercial. Overall, he looked like every middle management douchebag who's ever existed, the kind of guy who says things like "circle back" and "touch base" unironically. And my wife was eating it up like it was the last meal on earth. She leaned forward, touched his arm, laughed at something he said. He smiled, that smug smile men get when they think they're clever, and said something back. Then she did something that made my blood run cold in a way that surprised me, considering I thought I was past caring. She brushed his sleeve, her fingers lingering there like a cat marking territory, slow and deliberate and intimate in a way that made it crystal clear this wasn't their first coffee date. I sat there in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching my wife flirt with some random guy in a coffee shop, like she was auditioning for a role in a movie about terrible people making terrible choices. Part of me wanted to storm in there, make a scene, flip a table, do something dramatic that would feel satisfying for about 30 seconds before the cops showed up. But I didn't, because I'm not an idiot, and more importantly, I'd learned something important over the past few days. Information is power, and revenge is a dish best served with evidence and a side of patience. So instead of confronting them, I did something way more useful. I waited. They talked for about 45 minutes, though it felt like 6 hours. At one point, he reached across the table and held her hand, and she let him, smiling like she'd just won something. The barista probably thought they were the cutest couple ever, having no idea she was watching someone's marriage get cremated in real time over $7 lattes. Finally, they got up to leave. He paid. Of course he paid, probably trying to impress her with his fancy credit card that definitely had rewards points he bragged about. They walked out together, and here's where it got interesting. They didn't kiss, didn't hug, just did that awkward shoulder touch thing that people do when they want to be affectionate, but are aware they're in public and one or both of them might be married to someone else. He walked to his car, a black BMW, naturally, because apparently everyone in this story drives a vehicle that costs more than common sense would suggest. She walked to hers. They waved at each other like teenagers after a first date, all giddy and stupid, and then they drove off in opposite directions. I followed him, not her. I already knew where she was going, probably home to continue pretending she spent Friday nights doing groceries and living a totally normal life. No, I wanted to know who this guy was, where he lived, whether he was married, whether there was a Mrs. Watch guy sitting at home wondering why her husband was late from work again. I kept a few cars back, following him like I was in some kind of low-budget spy movie. He drove through downtown, took the interstate for about 10 minutes, then exited into one of those neighborhoods where every house looked like it belonged on a magazine cover, and every lawn looked like someone measured the grass with a ruler. Old money neighborhood. The kind of place where people had HOAs with actual power and probably held meetings about what color you could paint your mailbox. He pulled into a driveway of this massive colonial-style house that probably had more bathrooms than most people have rooms. White with black shutters, perfectly maintained garden, double garage, the whole suburban dream package. I parked down the street, far enough away that I wasn't obvious, but close enough to see what happened next. And then she appeared. A woman came out of the house, elegant, maybe late 30s, wearing yoga pants and a cardigan like she'd just come from teaching a class on how to be effortlessly put together. She had this calm energy about her, the kind of woman who probably volunteered at charity events and made homemade cookies that actually tasted good. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she was smiling as she walked up to the car. He got out, and she kissed him. Not a peck on the cheek. A real kiss. The kind of kiss you give someone you've been married to for years and still actually like. She said something. I couldn't hear from where I was parked, but her body language read happy, comfortable, completely unaware that her husband had just spent 45 minutes flirting with another woman over overpriced coffee. I sat there watching them, and I felt this weird smile spread across my face. Not a happy smile. More like the smile you get when you're playing chess and you suddenly see 5 moves ahead and realize you're about to win. Oh, this just got Netflix-level messy, I said out loud to my empty car. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos. Clean evidence. The house number clearly visible. His license plate. A few shots of him and his wife together looking all domestic and blissful. Nothing creepy or illegal. Just documentation that Mr. Fancy Watch had a whole entire life here. A whole entire wife who probably had no idea he was out there collecting side pieces like they were Pokemon cards. I didn't want revenge yet. Not the messy, immediate kind where you blow everything up and then have to deal with the fallout before you've even planned your exit strategy. No, I wanted choreography. I wanted this to be beautiful. I wanted every move planned out so perfectly that when it all came crashing down, nobody could say I acted out of anger or spite. They just have to acknowledge that I played the game better than anyone else at the table. See, most people think revenge is about destruction, about making the other person hurt as much as you hurt. But that's amateur hour. That's emotional thinking. That's the kind of revenge that gets you in trouble and doesn't actually make you feel better. Real revenge, the kind that actually means something, is about precision. It's about gathering all the pieces, understanding the whole board, and then making your move when everyone least expects it. I sat there for another 20 minutes, watching them through their kitchen window like the world's most justified stalker. They were cooking dinner together, laughing, looking like a commercial for whatever the hell normal people sell when they pretend their lives are perfect. She didn't know. The wife. Mrs. Watchguy had no clue that her husband was out there building a backup plan in case his current life got boring. And suddenly I had this thought that hit me like lightning. I bet my wife doesn't know he's married either. I bet Mr. Fancy Watch fed her some line about being divorced or separated or single, because guys like him always do. They're not just cheaters. They're liars who cheat and then lie about the cheating, like some kind of awful Russian nesting doll of deception. I took a few more photos, made note of the address, and then drove home with the kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing you're holding all the cards and nobody else has even realized the game started. The dance was about to begin, and I was going to choreograph every single step. The next day, I woke up with the kind of purpose usually reserved for people who found religion or started pyramid schemes. Except my mission was way more satisfying than selling essential oils to my friends or pretending I'd been saved. I had information, I had evidence, and I had a plan that was either going to be brilliant or land me in some kind of ethical gray area that would make my therapist earn her hourly rate. I spent the morning at work pretending to care about spreadsheets and quarterly reports while actually using my detective skills, which apparently I had, who knew, to figure out who Mr. Fancy Watch really was. A little LinkedIn stalking, some cross-referencing with the address I documented, and boom, Derek Morrison, Senior Vice President of Operations at Hutchinson and Reed Financial Services. Married to Mara Morrison for 12 years. 2 kids, based on the family photos on his Instagram that he probably should have made private if he was going to be out here collecting affairs like baseball cards. And here's the kicker that made me literally laugh out loud at my desk, causing Janet from accounting to look at me like I'd finally snapped. Hutchinson and Reed Financial Services. My wife worked there, in marketing, which meant Derek Morrison wasn't just some random guy. He was her boss, or at least in her chain of command. This wasn't a chance meeting at a coffee shop. This was workplace affair territory, which was both cliché as hell and absolutely perfect for what I was about to do. By lunch, I had Mara Morrison's phone number. Don't ask me how. Let's just say people put way too much information on social media and leave it there like they're inviting the whole world to their personal business. I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at my phone, trying to figure out how exactly you call someone to tell them their husband is cheating without sounding like a psycho or a prank caller. Finally, I just dialed. Rip the Band-Aid off, right? It rang 3 times. Then hello. Her voice was warm, professional, with just a hint of confusion because obviously she didn't recognize the number. Hi. Is this Mara Morrison? I asked, suddenly aware that I hadn't actually planned what I was going to say beyond the opening line. Yes, this is she. Who's calling? I took a breath. My name is Mason. Mason Porter. We've never met, but we have something in common that I think we should talk about. It involves your husband. There was a pause. The kind of pause that stretches out long enough to make you wonder if the person on the other end hung up or died or spontaneously combusted. Then, what about my husband? Her voice had changed. Less warm, more guarded. She knew. Not the details maybe, But somewhere in her gut, she knew that this call wasn't good news. Women always know. It's like they have this sixth sense that detects bullshit from 3 miles away. They just sometimes choose to ignore it because the truth is scarier than the comfortable lie. Look, this is going to sound crazy, and I promise I'm not some weirdo or a scammer or anything like that, I said, talking fast because I could feel her about to hang up. But I think our spouses are having an affair. My wife works at Hutchinson and Reed. Derek Morrison is her boss. And yesterday I watched them have coffee together at Catalyst, and it was not the kind of coffee that's covered in the employee handbook, if you know what I mean. Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear her breathing, could practically hear her brain working through this information, deciding whether to believe the random stranger on the phone or hang up and pretend this conversation never happened. How do I know you're not just some crazy person? She finally asked, but her voice cracked a little on the word crazy, and I knew she was already halfway to believing me. Because crazy people don't usually have photos, I said. I've got pictures from yesterday. Him and my wife at the coffee shop. Him coming home to you. I followed him. I know that sounds insane, and maybe it is, but I needed to know who he was. And when I saw you kiss him in the driveway, when I saw that he had this whole life with you, I realized you deserve to know what he's doing when he's supposedly working late. Silence. Then, send me the photos. I did. Right there, sitting in my car, I texted her 3 pictures that told the whole story. Derek and my wife laughing at the coffee shop, her touching his arm, him holding her hand, and then one of him and Mara in their driveway, looking like a couple in a life insurance commercial, completely oblivious to the fact that their marriage was about to become a case study in irony. My phone rang 30 seconds later. Where can we meet? She asked, and her voice was different now. Harder, like steel wrapped in silk. This was a woman who'd just had her worst suspicions confirmed and was already moving into action mode instead of falling apart mode. I liked her immediately. There's a park on Riverside Drive. Quiet. Public enough that you won't think I'm gonna murder you, but private enough that we can talk, I suggested. 2 hours. I'll be there. She hung up before I could respond, which was fair. I'd just blown up her life via phone call. She probably needed those 2 hours to process, to rage, to cry, or to do whatever people do when they find out their spouse is a lying piece of garbage with good credit and a nice watch. I showed up 15 minutes early because I'm anxious like that, and spent the time sitting on a bench watching joggers and dog walkers go by, all of them probably dealing with their own drama, but at least having the decency to do it in private instead of involving strangers via phone calls. She arrived exactly on time, which told me she was the kind of person who valued punctuality even when her life was imploding. She was wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater, her hair down now instead of in that ponytail, and she was carrying a travel mug that probably said something inspirational on it like, "World's most undervalued wife," though I couldn't see the actual text from where I was sitting. I stood up as she approached, and we did that awkward thing where neither of us knew whether to shake hands or just stand there like 2 people who'd matched on the world's worst dating app. "Mason?" she asked, even though it was pretty obvious it was me since I was the only person standing around looking like I was waiting for someone. "That's me," I said. "Mara," she nodded, and we sat down on the bench, both of us staring straight ahead at first like we were strangers on a bus who accidentally made eye contact, and now had to pretend the other person didn't exist. "So," she said finally, "tell me everything." And I did. I told her about my wife pulling away, about the coffee shop, about following Derek home, about realizing he'd been lying to everyone. I showed her more photos on my phone, and with each one, I could see her face getting tighter, her jaw clenching harder, her knuckles going white around that travel mug. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I suspected something was off. He's been distant, working late all the time, showering as soon as he gets home, which he never used to do. All the classic signs, you know. But I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was one of those crazy wives who sees cheating everywhere." She laughed, but it was bitter. Turns out I wasn't crazy enough. "Yeah, well, my wife's been treating me like I'm radioactive for months," I said. "Now I know why. Can't exactly touch your husband with affection when you're too busy planning coffee dates with your boss." Mara turned to look at me for the first time, really look at me, and I saw something in her eyes that matched what I was feeling, not just anger or hurt, but this cold, calculating determination. So what do you want to do about it? She asked. Honestly, I want them to face consequences, I said. Not in some crazy, key their cars kind of way, but real consequences. The kind where they can't just sweep this under the rug and move on like nothing happened. She nodded slowly, and I could see the wheels turning. Derek's company has a strict policy about relationships between supervisors and subordinates. It's a firing offense. At minimum, it's grounds for disciplinary action and transfer. So if someone were to report this to HR, I said, letting the sentence hang there, it would be investigated. Thoroughly. She smiled, and it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just figured out how to win a game they didn't even know they were playing. I know people in HR. We're friendly. We have drinks sometimes. I've been to the company holiday parties for 12 years. We make a pretty good team for two people who just met, I said. Trauma bonding, she replied. It's very efficient. She took a sip from her mug, which I could now see actually did say something on it. Nevertheless, she persisted. Perfect. We talked for another hour, making plans, comparing notes, building a strategy that felt less like revenge and more like justice with really good timing. We exchanged numbers, agreed to keep each other updated, and made a pact that we'd handle this like adults. Cold, calculating adults who were done being played for fools. As we were about to leave, I said, you know, if someone had told me a week ago that I'd be plotting corporate espionage with a stranger in a park, I would have said they were nuts. Mara smiled. A real smile this time, small but genuine. If someone had told me my husband was cheating with his subordinate, I would have said they had the wrong guy. Derek's too boring to have an affair. She shook her head. Guess boring people surprise you. Revenge? I asked, testing the word. She considered it for a moment, then shook her head. No. Closure. But I'm not against applause when this all goes down. We shook hands then, like business partners sealing a deal, which I guess we were. Partners in the business of ending our respective marriages with dignity and making sure the people who betrayed us didn't get to just walk away clean. I'll call you tomorrow, she said. We'll coordinate timing. Make sure we're both ready. Sounds like a plan. She walked to her car, a sensible Honda, because of course she was the responsible one while her husband drove around in his midlife crisis BMW. I watched her go, and I realized something. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had an ally. Someone who understood exactly what I was going through because she was going through it too. It felt professional, clinical even, but it was about to get very, very personal. At exactly 6 p.m. on a perfectly ordinary Wednesday, because dramatic revelations should happen on the most boring day of the week for maximum ironic effect, Mara knocked on my door. I'd spent the entire day at work pretending to care about reports and emails while actually running through the plan in my head about 17,000 times, making sure every detail was perfect. This wasn't something you could half-ass. This was theater, and we were about to put on the performance of a lifetime. I opened the door, and there she was, looking calm and composed in dark jeans and a gray blazer like she was attending a business meeting instead of about to detonate two marriages simultaneously. She was holding a folder, the evidence, all printed out and organized because Mara was apparently the kind of person who color-coded her revenge. You ready for this? I asked, letting her in. I've been ready since I found a receipt for jewelry in his car 3 months ago that I never received, she said, walking into my living room and setting the folder down on the coffee table like it was a briefcase full of nuclear codes. Where's your wife? Still at work. She texted me an hour ago saying she'd be home by 6:15. Traffic on the interstate, apparently. I made air quotes around traffic because at this point, everything my wife said sounded like a lie, even when she was probably telling the truth. Derek thinks I'm at book club, Mara said, and something about the way she said it made me laugh. Here we were, two betrayed spouses, and we were both using the same excuses our partners probably used when they were sneaking around. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. We sat down on the couch, and for a minute, neither of us said anything. This was it, the point of no return. Once my wife walked through that door and saw Mara sitting in our living room, there was no taking this back, no pretending it never happened, no smoothing things over with apologies and promises to work on the marriage. This was the nuclear option, and we both had our fingers on the button. You know what's weird? I said, breaking the silence. I'm not even nervous. I thought I'd be freaking out right now, but I just feel calm. Mara nodded. That's because you already grieved the marriage. You've been grieving it for months, watching it die in slow motion. This is just making it official." She was right. I'd been mourning my marriage since that first flinch in the kitchen, maybe even before that. This wasn't an ending. It was just the acknowledgement that things had ended a long time ago, and we'd all been too cowardly or comfortable to admit it. At 6:17, because my wife was never on time for anything except apparently coffee dates with her boss, I heard her car pull into the driveway. Keys jingling. The front door opening. Her usual sigh that she did every time she came home, like walking into her own house, was somehow exhausting. "Mason," she called out, probably expecting me to be in the kitchen or the guest room or anywhere except sitting in the living room with a stranger who was about to ruin her entire week. "In here," I called back, and I heard her footsteps on the hardwood floor, getting closer. She walked into the living room, still looking at her phone, probably texting Derek about how she'd successfully made it home without her idiot husband suspecting anything. Then she looked up. Her face did this thing that I wish I'd recorded because it was absolutely priceless. Her eyes went wide, her mouth dropped open, and all the color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug and her blood just decided to evacuate. She looked at Mara, then at me, then back at Mara, her brain clearly trying to process what was happening and coming up with error messages. "Who is she?" she yelled, and her voice cracked on the last word, which would have been satisfying if this whole thing wasn't so pathetically predictable. I smiled, actually smiled, like I was hosting a dinner party and introducing guests. "Honey, meet Mara Morrison. Mara, this is my wife, whose name you already know because I've complained about her extensively over the past few days." My wife's jaw hit the floor so hard I'm pretty sure it left a dent. Even gravity said, "Ouch," and tried to look away out of respect for her dignity, which was currently circling the drain. "Morrison," my wife repeated, and I could see the exact moment it clicked. Her face went from confused to horrified to caught red-handed in about 2 seconds flat. "Wait, you're Derek's wife," Mara finished, her voice calm and cold like she was reading a weather report about someone else's disaster. "Yes." Surprised? "Don't be. Mason and I have been comparing notes." Mara pulled out her phone with the efficiency of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. She started scrolling through photos, my wife and Derek at the coffee shop, texting screenshots, restaurant receipts, all organized chronologically like a timeline of terrible decisions. "That's not. We were just. It's not what it looks like," my wife stammered, running through the greatest hits of cheater excuses like she was reading from a script that every guilty person in history has used. "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," I said, standing up and crossing my arms. "Unless you're going to tell me that holding hands with your married boss over $7 lattes is part of some new corporate team-building exercise I haven't heard about." She tried a different approach, switching tactics like a politician in a losing debate. "It was just friendly. We're friends. Derek's been mentoring me at work." "Mentoring," Mara repeated, and she said the word like it tasted bad. "Is that what we're calling it now? Because I've seen the text messages, sweetheart. Derek's not great at deleting things. And unless I can't stop thinking about you is the new corporate motto at Hutchinson and Reed. I think we can drop the mentorship story." My wife's face cycled through about 15 different emotions. Panic, anger, embarrassment, more panic. She looked at me like I was the villain in this scenario, like I'd somehow wronged her by discovering her affair and having the audacity to confront her about it with witnesses. "This is crazy," she said, her voice going shrill. "You followed me? You stalked my boss? That's psychotic, Mason." "Psychotic would be pretending I didn't see what I saw," I said calmly, enjoying this way more than I probably should have. This is just efficient. Call it what you want, but at the end of the day, you got caught. And unlike you, I didn't need to lie about where I was or who I was with to figure out the truth." She turned to Mara, maybe thinking she could find sympathy there, some kind of woman-to-woman understanding. "Look, I don't know what he told you, but he told me the truth," Mara interrupted, standing up now too. "And then he showed me proof. And then I went through my husband's phone and found even more proof. So unless you're about to tell me that all of this is some elaborate deepfake conspiracy, I suggest you save your breath." My wife stuttered through every excuse in the book: charity work, company projects, stress relief, therapy recommendations from Derek, ghost of Christmas past. Probably would have blamed the moon cycle if she thought we'd buy it. Each excuse was more desperate than the last, and watching her scramble was like watching someone try to put out a fire with gasoline. "We never slept together," she finally shouted, like that was somehow the trump card that would make everything okay. I laughed, actually laughed out loud, the kind of laugh that comes from the depths of your soul when something is so absurd it breaks your brain. "Oh, well, in that case, let me just cancel this whole intervention. Honey, you only emotionally cheated with your married boss. That's totally fine. My bad." Mara wasn't laughing, though. She was just watching my wife with this expression of pure disgust, like she was looking at something she found stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "You know what the worst part is?" Mara said quietly. "It's not even the affair. It's the lying, the sneaking around. The fact that you both looked at your spouses every single day and chose to betray us while pretending everything was normal." I walked over to the coffee table and picked up a glass of water I'd poured earlier, because hydration is important, even during emotional warfare. I took a sip, letting the silence stretch out uncomfortably, watching my wife squirm under the weight of her own terrible choices. "So here's how this is gonna go," I said finally, setting the glass down with deliberate care. "You're going to pack your things. Tonight. Right now, actually. You're going to leave, and you're going to figure out where you're staying, because it's not here. Not anymore." "You can't just kick me out," she protested. "This is my house, too. Actually, the house is in my name because your credit was garbage when we bought it," I reminded her pleasantly. "But nice try. And before you start crying about your rights or whatever, just remember that I have photographic evidence of your affair with your supervisor, which I'm sure a lawyer would find very interesting during divorce proceedings." She opened her mouth to argue, but Mara cut her off. "And I'll be filing for divorce, too, and reporting this to HR at Hutchinson and Reed, because last I checked, supervisor-subordinate relationships violate company policy. So you might want to start updating your resume." My wife looked between us, and I could see it finally sinking in. This wasn't a fight she could win. This wasn't something she could talk her way out of or explain away or minimize until we all just agreed to forget about it. This was real consequences for real actions, and she was about to learn what accountability felt like. "You've been promoted," I said calmly, smiling like I'd just given her good news. "To single. Congratulations. You earned it." The silence that followed was absolutely beautiful. Sweet, delicious silence that tasted better than anything I'd experienced in months. No excuses, no explanations, no desperate attempts to rewrite history. Just quiet acceptance that the jig was up and the curtain was falling. Finally, my wife turned and ran upstairs, and I could hear her in the bedroom, slamming drawers and probably crying, though honestly, I was too busy feeling relieved to care much about her emotional state. Mara looked at me and gave a small nod. "Well," she said, "that went exactly as planned." "Better, actually," I said. I didn't think she'd try the mentorship excuse. That was a nice touch. We both smiled, not happy smiles, but satisfied ones. The smiles of people who just finished a job well done and were ready to move on to the next chapter of their lives. She thundered up the stairs like a tornado with feelings, and for the next 30 minutes, Mara and I sat in my living room listening to the symphony of drawers slamming, hangers scraping, and what sounded like someone having a complete emotional breakdown set to the soundtrack of aggressive packing. At one point, something crashed, probably that ceramic vase her mother gave us that I always hated anyway, and Mara raised her eyebrows at me like, "Should we check on that?" But I just shook my head. Some things need to break, and honestly, that vase was ugly as hell. When she finally came back downstairs, she was dragging 2 suitcases that looked like they'd been packed by someone having a panic attack in the dark. Her eyes were red and puffy, her hair was a mess, and she had that wild look people get when they're running on pure adrenaline and poor life choices. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and glared at both of us with the kind of hatred usually reserved for people who spoil TV shows or talk during movies. "You'll regret this," she spat out, her voice shaking with either rage or tears or both. "Both of you. You'll regret being so cruel." I stood up slowly, deliberately, and walked over to her with my hands in my pockets like I was the most relaxed person in the world. "You know what I actually regret?" I said conversationally. "I regret not doing this 6 months ago when I first noticed you pulling away. I regret wasting time trying to fix something you'd already decided to break. But this," I gestured around at the scene we'd just created, "this I'm gonna sleep real well about." "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked. and now she was playing the victim card, which was bold considering she'd just been caught red-handed in an affair with her married boss. I don't know. Your sister's place? A hotel? Derek's BMW? Honestly, that's a you problem now, I said, channeling every ounce of not my circus, not my monkey's energy I could muster. But I can tell you where you're not going, and that's back upstairs into what used to be our bedroom. She looked at Mara, maybe hoping for some female solidarity or sympathy, but Mara just smiled that cold smile she perfected over the last hour and said, "Don't look at me. I'm dealing with my own cheating spouse situation. You two can carpool to Consequenceville for all I care." My wife grabbed her suitcases with the kind of dramatic flair that would have won her an Oscar if this were a movie and not just her life falling apart in real time. She dragged them to the door, struggling because she'd apparently overpacked, shocker, and turned around one last time. "You know what? I hope you're happy together," she said, her voice dripping with venom and the implication that Mara and I were somehow the real villains in this story. "We're not together, you walnut," I said, unable to help myself. "We're just two people who got cheated on by your boyfriend and decided to compare notes. Not everything is a romance. Sometimes it's just shared trauma and good timing. Whatever helps you sleep at night," she muttered, yanking open the door. "Actually, not having a cheater in my bed is what's going to help me sleep at night," I called after her. "That, and maybe some melatonin. I hear it works wonders." She slammed the door so hard the windows rattled, and then we heard her struggling with the suitcases down the front steps, cursing under her breath. Her car door slammed, the engine started, and then she was gone, leaving nothing but the smell of her perfume and the faint echo of terrible decisions. I turned to Mara, and we both just stood there for a second in the sudden quiet. Then she started laughing. Not a mean laugh, but the kind of slightly hysterical laugh people do when they've just been through something intense and their brain doesn't know how else to process it. "That was," she started, trying to find the words. "Incredible," I offered. "Satisfying. Better than therapy. All of the above," she said, wiping her eyes. "God, I needed that. I needed to see his face when he realizes his whole life is about to implode." "Speaking of which," I said, pulling out my phone, "what time does Derek usually get home?" "Around 7:30. If he's actually coming straight from work and not making detours to coffee shops with subordinates," she said, her voice hardening again. I looked at the time. 6:53. "You should probably head home. Get there before he does. That way you can have everything set up nice for him." She nodded, grabbing her purse and the folder of evidence. "I'll text you after. Let you know how it goes. I'll be waiting with popcorn," I said, walking her to the door. She paused on the porch and turned back to me. "Thanks, Mason, for calling me, for not just letting this slide. We deserved better than what they gave us," I said simply. "Sometimes you gotta take out your own trash." She smiled, a real smile this time, and headed to her sensible Honda. I watched her drive away, and then I closed the door and stood in my suddenly very quiet house. It felt different already. Lighter, like someone had opened all the windows and let out air that had been going stale for months. The next morning, I woke up in the guest room, which was now just going to be my room, I guess, and felt more rested than I had in weeks. No tension, no tiptoeing around someone's mood, no wondering if today would be the day she'd finally just admit she didn't want to be married anymore. Just peace. Glorious, uncomplicated peace. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and called the HR department at Hutchinson and Reed. A woman named Patricia answered, sounding way too cheerful for 8:30 in the morning. "Hi, Patricia, this is Mason Porter. I'm calling to report a policy violation involving 2 employees at your company," I said, keeping my voice professional and calm like I was ordering a pizza instead of potentially ending 2 careers. "Oh," she said, her cheerfulness dimming considerably. "What kind of violation?" "The kind where a senior vice president is having an inappropriate relationship with someone he directly supervises," I said. "Derek Morrison and my soon-to-be ex-wife. I have documentation if you need it." There was a pause while she processed that bomb. Yes, we would need documentation. This is a serious allegation." "I understand. I can email everything over within the hour. Photos, text message screenshots, the works. My ex-wife's name is Rachel Porter. She's in your marketing department." "Mr. Porter, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention," Patricia said, and now she sounded like she was already mentally preparing for the nightmare of paperwork and investigations this was going to create. We take these matters very seriously. I'll need to forward this to our ethics committee and our legal department. You do what you need to do, I said pleasantly. I'm just a concerned citizen making sure company policy is being followed. Have a great day, Patricia. I hung up and immediately forwarded all the evidence to the HR email address Patricia had given me. Photos, timestamps, everything organized and labeled like I was submitting a college thesis on how to catch your spouse being trash, a case study. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from Mara. Derek's been suspended pending investigation. He's losing his mind, currently yelling about lawsuits and privacy violations. I'm enjoying my coffee and watching him spiral. This is therapeutic. Me. That was efficient. Mara. I'm a woman who believes in customer service. When I deliver consequences, I deliver them on time and under budget. I sent back a laughing emoji, the honest kind, not the sarcastic, I'm dead inside, one I'd been using for months whenever my wife sent me those passive-aggressive texts about forgetting to buy milk or whatever minor infraction I'd committed that day. Me, how are you doing? Really? Mara, honestly? I'm okay. Better than okay. I feel like I can breathe for the first time in months. Derek's in the guest room. I've called a lawyer, and I'm pretty sure this is the beginning of my villain arc. Me. Villain arcs are underrated. Very empowering. Mara, right? I should have been a villain years ago. Heroes are exhausting, and nobody appreciates them. I smiled at my phone, feeling that weird camaraderie you get with someone when you've been through battle together. Even if the battle was just exposing two cheaters and watching their lives implode in real time. It wasn't romance, wasn't even really friendship yet, just two people who understood exactly what the other was going through because they were living it simultaneously. The rest of the day, I got texts from various people. Jerry saying he heard through the grapevine that Rachel had moved in with her sister and was telling everyone I'd forced her out. Tom from the barbecue awkwardly asking if I was okay. Even my mom calling, because apparently news travels fast when your marriage explodes. To everyone, I gave the same answer. I'm good. Really good. Better than I've been in a long time. And the crazy thing? It was true. I wasn't just saying it to make people feel better or to pretend I was handling things well. I actually felt good. Lighter. Like I'd been carrying around a backpack full of someone else's problems and finally realized I could just put it down and walk away. That night, I ordered pizza, watched a movie I actually wanted to watch instead of whatever reality TV garbage Rachel always insisted on, and went to bed at a reasonable hour in my own room that smelled like my cologne and not her perfume. And I slept like a baby who'd just discovered the concept of boundaries and decided they were pretty great actually. A week later, 7 glorious days of sleeping peacefully, eating what I wanted, and not having to explain my whereabouts to someone who'd spent months lying about theirs. Rachel showed up at my door with a pie. An actual pie. Like we were living in some 1950s sitcom where baked goods fixed broken marriages and infidelity could be swept under the rug with the right amount of whipped cream and apologies. I was in the middle of my second coffee, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt that said, "I'm not arguing. I'm just explaining why I'm right." A gift from Jerry that had never been more appropriate when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and there she was, holding what appeared to be an apple pie and wearing this expression that was probably supposed to look apologetic, but mostly just looked uncomfortable, like she'd eaten something that disagreed with her and was trying to smile through the stomach cramps. I debated not answering, just standing there in silence until she gave up and left, taking her weaponized pie with her. But curiosity got the better of me. Plus, I wanted to see what kind of manipulation tactics she'd try now that the initial shock had worn off, and she'd had time to workshop her approach with her sister and whatever enabling friends she had left. I opened the door, but didn't step aside to let her in. Just stood there in the doorway like a bouncer at a club who'd already decided you weren't getting past the velvet rope. "Hey," she said, her voice doing that soft, vulnerable thing that women do when they're trying to seem harmless and reasonable. "Can we talk? Like adults?" I almost laughed. "We are adults," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "That's exactly why I'm not pretending to forget what happened just because you showed up with carbs." She held up the pie like it was evidence in her defense. "I made your favorite. Apple, with that lattice crust you like. I thought we could sit down and just talk. Really talk. Without all the anger and drama." My favorite is actually cherry, I said, because it was, and she would have known that if she'd paid attention to literally anything about me in the last 3 years. But points for effort, I guess. Very thoughtful of you to beg for the husband you cheated on. Her face twitched, just a little, but I caught it. That micro expression that said she was already getting annoyed that I wasn't playing along with her redemption arc. Mason, please. Can I just come in? 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I considered it for exactly 2 seconds, then stepped out onto the porch instead, pulling the door mostly closed behind me. Porch only, I said firmly. New rule. You want to talk? We talk out here where the neighbors can see us, and I can go back inside whenever I decide this conversation is over. She blinked at me like her Wi-Fi was buffering, trying to process that I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Are you serious right now? Deadly, I said, crossing my arms. You wanted to talk like adults? Adults have boundaries. This is mine. Porch or nothing. She let out this dramatic sigh that could have powered a small wind turbine and sat down on the porch steps, setting the pie next to her like a sad consolation prize no one wanted. I stayed standing, leaning against the railing, maintaining my position of power in this negotiation I hadn't agreed to participate in. I miss you, she started, and I had to actively stop myself from rolling my eyes so hard they'd get stuck that way. I miss us. I miss our life together. Which part? I asked conversationally. The part where you were sleeping with your boss, or the part where you treated me like I was radioactive every time I tried to touch you? I'm curious which version of US you're nostalgic for, because from where I'm standing, neither sounds particularly worth missing. I wasn't sleeping with him, she insisted, like that technicality somehow made everything fine. We never actually. Yeah. You never slept together. You just had an emotional affair, held hands, texted constantly, and lied to me for months about where you were and who you were with. I interrupted. That's so much better. You're absolutely right. I should definitely take you back based on that totally convincing defense. She tried to reach for my arm. That same manipulative touch she probably used on Derek to make him think he was special, but I stepped back before she made contact. Her hand hovered in the air for a second before dropping back to her lap like a dead fish. Don't, I said simply. That doesn't work anymore. You really love your rules, don't you? She snapped. And there it was, the real Rachel, breaking through the carefully constructed nice girl facade like the Kool-Aid man through a wall. Everything has to be your way now. Your boundaries, your conditions, your timeline. Yeah, I said, not even trying to hide my smile. Turns out when you rebuild your life after someone tries to burn it down, you get to make the rules. Funny how that works. You're being unreasonable, she said, pulling out her favorite weapon, making me feel like I was the problem, like my totally justified response to her betrayal was somehow the real issue here. No, I'm being self-aware, I corrected her. There's a difference. Self-aware people recognize when they're being manipulated and choose not to participate. Unreasonable people would be out here yelling and throwing things. I'm just standing here, calmly declining your invitation to get hurt again. She stood up then, brushing off her jeans with aggressive swipes like she was trying to brush off the reality that this wasn't going according to her plan. Fine. You know what? Fine. But you're going to regret this, Mason. You're going to regret not forgiving me when you had the chance. I smiled then, a real, genuine smile that came from somewhere deep in my soul where I'd apparently stored all my self-respect for safekeeping. And you'll regret thinking forgiveness comes with home delivery, I said. Forgiveness isn't something you can just order up like pizza when you decide you want it. It's earned. Through time, through changed behavior, through actual accountability. Not through showing up with a pie and puppy dog eyes and hoping I'm stupid enough to fall for it. I came here to apologize, she said, her voice rising. No, you came here to see if you could manipulate me into taking you back without actually having to do any real work or face any real consequences. I said, my voice steady. There's a difference. A real apology would acknowledge what you did wrong, take responsibility for it, and accept that there are consequences you can't negotiate your way out of. This, I gestured at her and the sad pie. This is just you testing the waters to see if I'm still the same pushover who'd accept breadcrumbs and call it a meal. Her face went through several emotions. Anger, embarrassment, frustration, before settling on something that looked like defeat mixed with resentment. Not a good look, but an honest one at least. I can't believe you're throwing away 10 years of marriage over this. I'm not throwing it away, I said calmly. You threw it away when you decided your boss was more interesting than your husband. I'm just taking out the trash. There's a difference. She grabbed the pie, gripping it so hard I thought she might throw it at me, which would have been entertaining but also would have ruined my t-shirt, and marched down the steps toward her car. Halfway there, she turned around one more time, mascara starting to run because apparently she'd added crying to her performance. I hope you're happy, she said, and it came out bitter, like the opposite of a blessing. Getting there, I said honestly. It's a process, but I'm making progress. Thanks for asking. I meant it sarcastically. I know. I chose to take it literally. It's called boundary setting. My therapist is very proud. She made this strangled noise that was half sob, half scream, through the pie in her passenger's seat. Hopefully it survived, because someone should enjoy it even if it wasn't going to be me, and peeled out of my driveway like she was auditioning for Fast and Furious, suburban desperation. I stood on the porch for a minute, watching her taillights disappear, and waited for the guilt to hit. Waited for that voice in my head that said I should have been nicer, should have heard her out, should have given her another chance because that's what good people do, and marriage is about forgiveness and all that Hallmark card nonsense. But it never came. Instead, I just felt relief. Pure, uncomplicated relief that I'd held my ground and not let her back in just because she showed up with baked goods and fake tears. Relief that I'd learned how to say no to people who didn't deserve yes. Relief that somewhere along the way, I'd grown a spine and decided to actually use it. I went back inside, poured myself another coffee, and texted Jerry. Ex-wife just showed up with a pie trying to reconcile. Told her porch-only policy. She left mad. Jerry, did you at least get to keep the pie? Me. Nope. She took it with her. Probably going to eat her feelings in her sister's driveway. Jerry, her loss. Literally and figuratively. Proud of you, man. Me. Thanks. Therapy is expensive, but apparently worth it. Later that afternoon, I found out through the neighborhood kid who was weirdly plugged into local gossip that Rachel had given the pie to Mrs. Henderson next door. Mrs. Henderson's grandson had tried it and reported back that it was kind of dry, actually. I texted that information to Mara because she was the only person who would appreciate the poetic justice of Rachel's reconciliation pie being objectively disappointing. Mara, even her baked goods are half-assed. This is beautiful. Me. The universe has a sense of humor. Mara. The universe is doing stand-up comedy at this point. How are you holding up? Me. Better than the pie, apparently. You. Mara. Derek's lawyer sent me a very aggressive letter about harassment because I reported him to HR. My lawyer sent back an even more aggressive letter about evidence and violations of company policy. It's like watching two dogs bark at each other through a fence. Me. Entertainment value. High. Mara, exactly. I'm learning that divorce is 90% paperwork and 10% wondering why you didn't do this sooner. That night, I ordered Chinese food. The good kind, not the compromise because someone doesn't like spicy food kind, and ate it while watching a documentary about space that Rachel would have hated because she thought space was boring and pointless. And you know what? Space wasn't boring. Space was fascinating, and I was finally free enough to enjoy it. Mara and I started texting regularly after that, which sounds weird when you explain it to other people. Yeah, I'm friends with my ex-wife's affair partner's wife, but made perfect sense to us. We were two survivors with matching scars, and there's something about shared trauma that cuts through all the normal awkward getting-to-know-you phases and jumps straight to the part where you can say whatever you're thinking without fear of judgment. Our first official hangout that wasn't revenge-related happened on a Saturday morning. She texted me at 8 asking if I wanted to grab coffee, and I said yes before my brain could overthink it and make it weird. We met at a local place, not Catalyst, because neither of us wanted to relive that particular crime scene, and ordered drinks that were reasonably priced and served by people who didn't act like they were curing cancer with espresso. So this is what normal people do, Mara said, settling into her chair with a latte that had actual foam art instead of whatever pretentious nonsense the hipster places did. They just hang out, without plotting revenge or gathering evidence. Wild concept. I agreed, taking a sip of my black coffee. I almost don't know what to talk about when I'm not comparing notes on our spouse's terrible life choices. We ended up talking for 2 hours about everything except Derek and Rachel. Work, hobbies, That new documentary series everyone was watching, why grocery stores put the milk in the back. Normal stuff that normal people talked about when they weren't navigating the aftermath of simultaneous divorces. It was easy, comfortable, like talking to someone who just got you without needing extensive backstory or emotional footnotes. After that, it became a thing. We'd meet up once or twice a week, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for walks in the park where we'd first formed our alliance. No pressure, no expectations, just two people who'd been through hell and decided they liked each other's company on the way out. One afternoon, we were walking around the lake near her house. She'd kicked Derek out by then, so she actually seemed relaxed in her own neighborhood when she brought up something that had apparently been bothering her. "People keep telling me I should fight for my marriage," she said, watching a duck family paddle by like they had their lives figured out better than any of us. My mom, some friends from church, even my hairdresser has opinions about it. They keep saying, marriage is sacred, that I should try counseling, that everyone makes mistakes. I thought about that for a second, watching the ducks do their thing. You know what fighting to keep trash doesn't make you. I finally said. She looked at me, eyebrow raised. What? Loyal. It makes you a raccoon. She stopped walking and just stared at me for a beat. Then she started laughing. That real, from the belly kind of laugh that people do when something hits them exactly right. She laughed so hard, she almost dropped her coffee, and a jogger passing by gave us a concerned look like we might be having some kind of episode. A raccoon, she repeated, wiping her eyes. Oh my God, that's perfect. That's exactly what it would be. Just me, digging through garbage, trying to find something worth keeping. Right? Like, congratulations, you successfully defended a dumpster, I said. What's the prize? More garbage. She shook her head, still grinning. I'm using that next time my mom brings it up. Sorry, Mom. I've decided not to be a raccoon today. That became our thing, finding humor in the absurdity of it all. Not the mean kind of humor that was really just bitterness in disguise, but genuine laughter at how ridiculous people could be, how predictable the advice was, how everyone suddenly became a marriage expert when your marriage was falling apart. We didn't need drama. We'd had enough drama to last us through retirement. What we needed was peace. And somehow, we'd found it in each other. Not in a romantic way. Neither of us was ready for that, and honestly, it would have ruined what we had. We needed friendship, the kind where you could say, I'm having a really bad day, and the other person just showed up with coffee and didn't try to fix it or make it about them. She became my calm, the person who understood without needing explanation, who'd been through the same fire and come out the other side still standing. And apparently, I became her comic relief, the person who could make her laugh about situations that should have made us both bitter and angry. One evening, we were sitting on a bench watching the sunset. Yeah, we'd become those people, but in our defense, the sunsets were actually pretty great when she said something that stuck with me. You know what's weird? She asked. I'm happier now than I was 6 months ago when I thought my marriage was fine. That's because ignorance isn't actually bliss, I said. It's just ignorance with better PR. She smiled at that. Derek's lawyer keeps pushing for mediation, keeps saying we should work it out like adults. And every time I get one of those emails, I just think about how I'm already working it out. By leaving. Exactly. Sometimes working it out means working yourself out of a bad situation. I said, people act like giving up on a marriage is failure, but staying in one that's killing you slowly? That's not success. That's just slow suicide with paperwork. We sat there quietly for a while, watching the sky turn orange and pink, and I realized something important. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning my next move or worrying about someone else's feelings or trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair. I was just existing, peacefully, with a friend who got it. And for once in my life, I slept fine knowing tomorrow would be more of the same, calm, simple, unbothered. No drama, no games, just good coffee and clean air. Derek lost his job 3 months after the HR investigation concluded. Turns out sleeping with subordinates, or almost sleeping with them, whatever version of the story he was selling, was exactly as bad for your career as company policy suggested it would be. He tried to spin it as mutual resignation, but everyone knew the truth. Corporate doesn't let you mutually resign when you've violated ethics policies and created liability issues. They just escort you out with a cardboard box and wishes for your future endeavors that nobody actually means. Rachel lost her comfortable setup when Derek couldn't be her sugar daddy anymore and his wife cleaned him out in divorce court. Last I heard, she was working at some startup that paid half what Hutchinson and Reed did and living with her sister, who apparently wasn't thrilled about the long-term roommate situation. The affair that was supposed to be her upgrade turned into her downgrade, which felt like the universe finally balancing its books. Me? I gained something way more valuable than revenge or vindication. I gained silence. And let me tell you, silence is priceless when you've spent years listening to someone's excuses, complaints, and the sound of your own dignity being chipped away one passive-aggressive comment at a time. I fixed my house, my peace, and my Spotify playlist. No more compromising on music. No more pretending I liked reality TV. No more walking on eggshells wondering if today would be the day she'd finally admit she checked out months ago. Just me, my space, and the beautiful quiet of not having to manage someone else's emotional chaos. Sometimes I think about that day. Me walking into my own living room with Mara, Rachel's face draining of color, her voice cracking as she yelled, "Who is she?" Like she was the victim in a story where she'd been cast as the villain. I remember the look on her face when I said, calm as Sunday morning, "Meet your boss's wife." That silence should have won an Oscar. Best supporting silence in a drama. The kind of quiet that speaks louder than any scripted confrontation ever could. Now, when people ask how I moved on, and they do ask, because apparently everyone's fascinated by divorce when it's not theirs, I give them the same answer every time. I didn't move on. I just moved up. Up from being treated like an afterthought. Up from accepting breadcrumbs of affection. Up from believing that loyalty meant staying in something that was slowly killing who I used to be. Mara and I still grab coffee every week. Still laugh about the absurdity of it all. She's dating now, some guy who owns a bookstore and has never cheated on anyone, which she says is a refreshingly low bar, but one she's grateful for anyway. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting there. Learning to trust again, learning to like myself again, learning that being alone is better than being with someone who makes you feel alone anyway. Every night, I brush my teeth beside the man in the mirror, and here's the thing. He's smiling now. Really smiling. Not that fake smile you give people when they ask how you're doing and you lie through your teeth. A real smile. The smile of someone who's calm, unbothered, and finally free. I look at that guy and think, you did it. You walked through fire and didn't let it burn you to ash. You chose yourself when everyone else chose comfort over truth. And every single night, that guy in the mirror looks back at me and nods. Because we both know the truth now. The best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. It's becoming so completely fine without them that their absence becomes irrelevant. And brother, I've never been more irrelevantly happy in my entire life. While I showered, my wife kept going through my bag. As a cybersecurity expert, I set a bait card with $57,000. The next day, I saw $48,700 in charges for luxurious hotels and 2 tickets to London with her lover. A week later, she came back, bragging, loved the spa trip. I laughed because the card she used. Look, I'm not saying I'm psychic or anything, but when you spend 15 years tracking down digital thieves who think they're smarter than the system, you develop what I like to call a bullshit radar. It's like a sixth sense, except instead of seeing dead people, I see patterns. Numbers that don't add up. Stories that sound too rehearsed. Smiles that last half a second too long. And let me tell you, that particular Tuesday morning, my radar was going absolutely berserk. I was in the shower, humming some completely forgettable tune that had been stuck in my head since the grocery store yesterday. You know how it is. Probably something from a commercial about yogurt or car insurance. When I heard the bathroom door creak open. Now, Claire and I had been together long enough that bathroom privacy was more of a suggestion than a rule, so I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she needed her hairbrush. Maybe she was grabbing her makeup bag. Normal married couple stuff, right? Wrong. So incredibly, spectacularly wrong. Through the frosted glass of the shower door, I could see her silhouette, and she wasn't going for the makeup bag. She was crouched down by my gym bag, the beat-up black Nike duffel that I'd been using since college because, honestly, why fix what isn't broken? She was rifling through it, not casually looking for something. Rifling, like a raccoon going through trash at 3 in the morning, except way more calculated and significantly less cute. I stood there under the hot water, shampoo still in my hair, watching this unfold like a nature documentary. You ever have one of those moments where time kind of slows down and you're watching yourself from outside your own body? Yeah, that. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to slam the shower door open and demand to know what the hell she was doing. But the professional part of me, the part that pays the mortgage, that part whispered, "Shut up, Marcus. Watch. Learn." So I did. I watched as she pulled out my wallet. Then my passport. Then she paused, holding my passport in both hands like she was weighing it, studying it, memorizing the damn thing. Her face had this expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't panic. It was concentration. Math. Like she was solving an equation in her head, and my identity documents were variables she needed to plug into her formula. I turned off the water, grabbed my towel, and stepped out with the kind of casual energy you'd use if you just caught your dog eating from the trash. You know, that fake, "Oh hey, what ya doing there?" vibe that fools absolutely nobody but makes everyone pretend everything's fine. "Hey babe," I said, towel drying my hair like my entire nervous system wasn't firing off alarm bells. "Lose something." Claire looked up, and here's the thing that really got me. She smiled. Not a guilty smile. Not an, "Oops, you caught me" smile. A genuine, warm, "Hey honey" smile that would have won her an Oscar if this were a movie. She held up my passport and said, "Just checking if you still had that hardware store receipt from last week. You know, the one for the shelf brackets? I need to return the wrong size screws." The hardware store receipt. In my passport. Right. Because that's totally where normal people store receipts for shelf brackets. Not in their wallet, not in the kitchen junk drawer, but sandwiched between pages of an official government document. The logic was so thin I could have used it as a coffee filter. "Oh yeah," I said, matching her energy with my own Academy Award-worthy performance. "I think I threw that out yesterday, actually. My bad." She shrugged, put my passport back in the bag. Carefully, I noticed exactly where she'd found it, and kissed me on the cheek before leaving the bathroom. "No worries," she said. "I'll just eat the $5. $5. Sure, Claire. Because you've been known to stress over $5 hardware returns." This is the same woman who once spent $70 on a candle because it was artisanal and hand-poured by monks in Vermont, or some equally ridiculous marketing pitch. I stood there in the bathroom, water dripping off my hair onto the tile floor, and I had to consciously choose not to laugh. Not because it was funny, although in a dark, twisted way, it kind of was, but because laughing would have meant admitting I knew something was wrong. And I wasn't ready to play that card yet. Let me introduce myself properly, since we're apparently going to be spending some time together on this absolute train wreck of a journey. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 38 years old, which means I'm old enough to know better, but apparently not old enough to have learned my lesson about ignoring red flags in relationships. I make a living hunting down electronic thieves, credit card fraudsters, identity theft rings, the kind of people who think they're criminal masterminds but are really just slightly tech-savvy idiots with expensive taste and no impulse control. I work as a fraud analyst for a private security firm, and before that, I did a stint with the FBI's cybercrimes unit until I realized I could make twice the money in the private sector and not have to deal with government bureaucracy that moves slower than a DMV on a Monday morning. I notice patterns for breakfast. Literally. I wake up, pour my coffee, and my brain starts cataloging data points. That's my job. That's my skill. That's what makes me very, very good at what I do. And that's exactly why this situation with Claire was so magnificently messed up, because every single alarm bell in my professional toolkit was clanging like a fire station at rush hour. But here's the kicker. Claire's face when I walked out of that shower didn't show guilt. It showed calculation. It showed someone who was comfortable with what they were doing. Someone who had done it before. Someone who had a plan. I got dressed, made my coffee, and sat at the kitchen table while Claire hummed in the bedroom, getting ready for her day. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Because if there's one thing I've learned in 15 years of tracking down thieves, it's this. If you want to catch someone in the act, you don't scare them away. You give them rope. You watch them weave it into a noose. You let them think they're winning. So I planted a seed. Not a literal seed. I'm not suddenly a gardener, but a trap. A beautiful, shiny, irresistible trap. I had a prepaid card in my wallet. One of those reloadable ones that I use for online purchases I don't want attached to my main accounts. I took it out and replaced it with a different card. A bait card. Brand new, never used, completely clean. I'd set it up that afternoon. As I sipped my coffee and listened to Claire singing in the bedroom, she was in a good mood, apparently. I allowed myself one small joke, just for my own sanity. If she ever spends my money on a bag I can't pronounce, I muttered to myself, I'll return it and charge her for the dictionary. The mood in the house was light. The sun was coming through the kitchen window. Claire came out in her favorite sundress, kissed the top of my head, and said something about meeting Jenna for lunch. Everything looked normal. Everything felt normal. My plan, however, was not normal. My plan was meticulous, surgical, and absolutely ruthless. Because I'd spent 15 years watching people destroy their lives over greed and stupidity, and I'd be damned if I was going to let it happen to me without at least documenting every single step of the process. I smiled at Claire as she left, waved goodbye like a dutiful husband, and then I sat back down at my laptop and started setting up the most elaborate trap I'd ever built. Not for a stranger, not for some anonymous criminal on the other end of an IP address. For my wife. Here's the thing about living with someone for 7 years. You start to notice the questions. Not the normal, how was your day? Or, did you remember to buy milk questions? I'm talking about the oddly specific, weirdly timed, suspiciously casual questions that make you wonder if you're having a conversation or being interrogated by someone who watched too many crime documentaries on Netflix. Claire had always been curious about my work. In the beginning, I thought it was cute. She'd ask about cases I was working on. Well, the ones I could actually talk about without violating about 17 different NDAs and possibly committing a federal crime. She'd lean in during dinner, eyes wide, totally captivated when I'd explain how credit card fraud networks operate, how identity thieves build their portfolios, how someone in Romania can empty your bank account while you're sleeping and never leave a digital fingerprint you can actually trace. She loved the detective stuff, the puzzle-solving aspect of it all. She'd nod along like she was taking mental notes, asking follow-up questions that seemed genuinely interested. Except now, looking back with the crystal-clear vision of hindsight and a healthy dose of paranoia, I realized she wasn't just interested. She was studying, learning, doing reconnaissance like a spy preparing for a mission, except the mission was apparently robbing me blind and living her best life on my dime. The questions had evolved over the years. They'd gotten more technical, more specific, less, wow, that's interesting, and more, okay, but how exactly does that work? About 6 months ago, maybe longer, she'd started asking things like, how fast do banks actually flag suspicious purchases? And what happens when a card gets used overseas? And my personal favorite, do those fraud alerts actually work in real time? Or is there a delay? At the time, I'd answered like the trusting idiot I apparently was. I'd explained that most banks have pretty sophisticated algorithms now, that international transactions definitely raise flags, that there's usually a small delay, but nothing major, maybe a few minutes to an hour depending on the system. I'd even walked her through how fraud detection works, like a professor lecturing to an eager student, completely oblivious to the fact that I was basically teaching a masterclass in How to Steal from Your Husband 101. And then there was Jenna. Oh, Jenna, Claire's best friend since college, the kind of woman who makes you feel poor just by existing in the same room as her. Jenna with her perfectly curated Instagram feed full of luxury vacations to places I can't pronounce and restaurants where the menu doesn't have prices, because if you have to ask, you clearly don't belong there. Jenna with her designer handbags that cost more than my car payment and her casual mentions of just popping over to Paris for the weekend, like normal people pop over to Target for paper towels. Claire idolized her. I'm not exaggerating. It was full-on worship. She'd scroll through Jenna's Instagram for hours, double-tapping photos of tropical beaches and 5-star hotels and champagne brunches, and I'd see this look on her face. Longing. Envy. That dangerous kind of wanting that makes people do stupid things. She'd make little comments like, must be nice to travel like that, or, I wonder what it's like to not worry about money, and I'd feel this knot in my stomach because we were doing fine. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling. We had a nice house, decent cars, we went out to dinner, took vacations. We were solidly middle class, living the American dream, or whatever you want to call it. But apparently, solidly middle class wasn't good enough. Not when Jenna was out there living like a character from a luxury lifestyle blog. The hints started about a year ago, subtle at first. Claire would mention how Jenna never seemed to worry about credit card bills. how she always had money for whatever she wanted, how she'd joke about having magic cards that never seemed to max out. At the time, I'd assumed Jenna came from money or married well or had some trust fund situation going on. I didn't think much of it because honestly, Jenna's financial situation was none of my business and I had my own job to worry about. But now I'm wondering if those conversations were less about admiration and more about aspiration. Like Claire was studying a blueprint for a lifestyle upgrade she couldn't afford legally, so she was exploring other options. So after the bathroom incident, let's call it what it was, I caught my wife rifling through my passport like a burglar casing a joint incident. I decided to run a little experiment. A test. A trap so beautiful and elegant that if this were a heist movie, someone would definitely steal my idea and make millions off it. I created the bait. And let me tell you, this bait was premium. Top shelf. The kind of bait that would make even an honest person pause and consider their moral compass. I set up a brand new credit card account. Not through my regular bank. I'm not an idiot. But through a secondary institution I use for work-related expenses. I loaded it with $57,000. Yes, you read that right. 57 grand. Enough money to make someone's eyes go wide and their better judgment take an extended vacation to somewhere far away. It was a mix of my own money and a line of credit I could access for work purposes, all perfectly legal and above board on my end. Then I programmed every single alarm, alert, and notification system known to modern banking on that sucker. GPS tracking for every transaction. Merchant ID logging. International purchase alerts. Unusual spending pattern flags. Time of day notifications. Hell, I probably could have set up an alert for when the magnetic strip got swiped if the technology existed. This card was wired up like a Christmas tree designed by paranoid security experts, which, coincidentally, is exactly what I am. I put the card in my everyday bag. Not hidden. Not tucked away in some secret pocket. Just casually placed in the wallet compartment where anyone rifling through my stuff, say, a curious wife looking for hardware store receipts, would easily find it. It was shiny and new, with my name embossed on it in that fancy metallic font that makes you feel important. It practically screamed, "Use me." Then I waited. And I grinned. I grinned like a man who just hid the last slice of cake in his sock drawer and was waiting to see who'd go looking for it. Because if Claire was innocent, if I was just being paranoid and reading too much into a simple moment of her looking for a receipt, then nothing would happen. The card would sit there unused. I'd feel like a jackass for a few days, and we'd go back to our normal lives. But if I was right, if my instincts were correct, and Claire was planning something, then this card was about to become the star witness in a case that would make my career look like amateur hour. I told myself jokes to cope with the weirdness of the situation. I'd sit at my desk at work and think, if she spends it on a spa day, at least she'll get massages for her guilt. Maybe they offer a forgiveness facial or a conscience-cleansing deep tissue treatment. Dark humor is what keeps people like me sane when we're watching our lives potentially fall apart in real time. Claire had no idea. She went about her days completely normal. She'd kiss me goodbye in the morning, text me updates about her day, send me funny memes she found online. We'd have dinner together, and she'd tell me about her afternoon with Jenna, about the new restaurant they tried or the boutique they browsed through. She was the perfect wife. Attentive, loving, completely and utterly full of crap. Because those questions kept coming. How do you track international purchases? What's the difference between fraud and unauthorized use? Can someone dispute a charge if they claim they didn't make it? She'd ask them so casually, like she was making small talk, but I was listening now, really listening. And every question sounded less like curiosity and more like research. I'd answer her, keeping my tone light and educational, all while my brain was cataloging every word. I was playing chess while she thought we were playing checkers, except the board was our marriage and the pieces were our entire future. Dramatic? Maybe. But you try staying calm when you're pretty sure your spouse is planning to commit fraud using your identity and see how level-headed you remain. The card sat in my bag for 3 days. 3 days of me checking my phone obsessively, waiting for alerts that didn't come. 3 days of wondering if I was losing my mind, if I'd let paranoia turn me into the kind of person who booby-traps their own marriage. 3 days of Claire being perfectly normal, which somehow made everything worse. And then, on day 4, my phone started buzzing. Not just buzzing, orchestrating. Alert after alert after alert. Like my phone had suddenly become a one-man band, and the only song it knew was "Someone's Spending Your Money." The game was on. And Claire had no idea she'd just stepped into a trap designed by someone who'd spent 15 years catching people exactly like her. You know that feeling when you're sitting in a meeting, nodding politely while someone drones on about quarterly projections or synergistic paradigm shifts or whatever corporate buzzword salad is trendy this week, and your phone starts vibrating in your pocket like it's trying to escape? Yeah, that was my Thursday afternoon. Except instead of some spam caller trying to sell me an extended car warranty, it was my entire financial surveillance system having a complete meltdown. I was at a client meeting downtown, one of those glass and steel office buildings where everything is chrome and uncomfortable modern furniture designed by people who apparently hate the human spine. The client was a mid-sized tech company worried about employee expense fraud, which in hindsight is pretty ironic considering what was happening in my own life at that exact moment. I was doing my professional fraud analyst routine, nodding thoughtfully, making intelligent sounds of agreement, probably saying things like and absolutely, while my brain was on autopilot, because I've given this same presentation about 200 times. Then my phone started buzzing. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. By the 6th buzz, I was pretty sure either the world was ending or someone was having a medical emergency, or, and this was the option I was really hoping wasn't true, Claire had found my bait card and decided to go on a shopping spree that would make a real housewife look financially responsible. I excused myself from the meeting with that universal, "I'm so sorry, but this might be urgent" face that every working professional has perfected. You know the one, apologetic but firm, suggesting that whatever's happening on your phone is definitely more important than talking about data breach protocols, but you're too polite to say it out loud. I stepped into the hallway, pulled out my phone, and felt my stomach drop like I'd just gone over the first hill of a roller coaster I definitely didn't buy tickets for. 11 alerts. 11. In the span of maybe 20 minutes. My phone screen looked like a slot machine that had just hit jackpot, except instead of winning money, I was watching it disappear in real time. First alert, $3,200 at the Ashton Grand, a downtown luxury hotel. The kind of place where the lobby has a chandelier that probably costs more than my car, and the coffee is served in cups that look like they belong in a museum. I knew the place. I'd driven past it about 1,000,000 times, but never actually gone inside, because I'm not the kind of guy who spends $200 a night for a bed when I have a perfectly good one at home. Second alert, $1,450 at Serenity Spa and Wellness. Because apparently after dropping $3,000 on a hotel room, the logical next step is to get a massage that costs more than most people's monthly grocery budget. I could practically see it. Claire lying on some heated table while someone with gentle hands and essential oils worked out the tension in her shoulders. Must be stressful, committing fraud. Really takes it out of you. Better get that deep tissue treatment. I stood there in that sterile office hallway, under fluorescent lights that made everything look vaguely post-apocalyptic, and I felt this weird mix of emotions. Anger, obviously. Betrayal, definitely. But also, and I'm not proud of this, a tiny bit of professional admiration. Because this wasn't impulse shopping. This wasn't someone finding a credit card and going, "Ooh, shiny," and buying whatever caught their eye at the nearest mall. This was methodical, planned, strategic. I ditched the meeting, told the client something came up, family emergency. We'd reschedule, sent my apologies through my assistant who definitely thought I was being weird, but was too professional to say anything. I practically ran to my car in the parking garage, got inside, locked the doors like I was about to do something illegal, and pulled up my fraud monitoring dashboard on my phone. The data was beautiful. Terrible, relationship ending, possibly divorce-inducing, but beautiful. Every transaction came with a timestamp, GPS coordinates, merchant category codes, even the last 4 digits of the card used, which, surprise, surprise, matched my bait card exactly. I could track Claire's afternoon like I was following a treasure map, except the treasure was my money and the map led straight to Betrayal Island. But here's where it got really interesting. This wasn't just random spending. The purchases had a pattern, a rhythm. The hotel charge came first, which made sense, secure a base of operations. Then the spa, probably to celebrate or relax or convince herself that what she was doing was somehow justified. And then, about 40 minutes after the spa charge, another alert popped up. 2 first-class tickets to London Heathrow. Departing in 3 days. 2 tickets. Not 1. 2. I sat in my car and stared at that notification like it might change if I looked at it long enough. 2 first-class tickets. Which meant Claire wasn't going alone. Which meant this wasn't some solo adventure of self-discovery or whatever rationalization she might use later. She had a partner. An accomplice. A +1 for her felony vacation. I clicked through to the detailed transaction info. Because yes, I'm that thorough, and also because I've spent 15 years learning exactly how to extract every possible piece of data from a purchase. The ticket purchase came from a travel booking site, and buried in the merchant data was passenger information. 2 names. One was Claire Elizabeth Hale, my wife of 7 years, the woman who promised to love and honor me and apparently decided honor was more of a suggestion than a commitment. The other name was Evan Garrett. Evan with the perfectly styled hair and the finance job and the Instagram photos of himself at wine tastings and golf courses. Evan, who I'd met exactly twice at dinner parties and both times thought he was the kind of guy who definitely peaked in high school, but was still dining out on that glory 20 years later. Evan, who was apparently now Claire's travel companion for an international fraud spree funded by my money. I did what any rational person would do in that situation. I laughed. Not a happy laugh. More like the kind of laugh that happens when your brain short-circuits because reality has become so absurd that laughter is the only response that makes sense. I sat in my car in that parking garage, surrounded by concrete and the faint smell of exhaust fumes, and I laughed until my sides hurt. Then I pulled myself together, because laughing about your wife stealing from you is only therapeutic for about 90 seconds before it becomes deeply sad. I needed to think. I needed to plan. I needed to figure out my next move because clearly, Claire had already figured out hers. I pulled up my contacts and found Agent Rivera's number. I'd worked with her on a few cases over the years, enough that we had a professional rapport and she knew I wasn't the kind of guy who cried wolf. I typed out a message. Need to talk. Got a situation. Fraud case, but personal. Can you meet? Her response came back in under a minute. Office. 1 hour. Bring evidence. I started the car and headed home first. Because if I was going to burn my marriage to the ground, I was going to make damn sure I had receipts. Literally. I pulled into the driveway, walked inside, and went straight to my office. I pulled up every alert, screenshot every transaction, downloaded every piece of merchant data the system had captured. I created a folder on my desktop labeled Evidence, because subtlety was no longer part of this equation. Then I checked the rest of my accounts, just to be thorough. Everything else was fine. No unusual activity, no mysterious charges, no signs that Claire had gone beyond the bait card. Which meant she'd taken the bait exactly as planned. Hook, line, and sinker. She'd found the card, saw the high limit, probably checked the balance online, and watched those 5 zeros glow on her screen like a beacon of terrible decisions. And she'd decided to help herself to an all-expenses-paid lifestyle upgrade. Before I left for Rivera's office, I did one more thing. I checked the purchase history against a calendar. Started looking back through the last few months, cross-referencing dates. And that's when I found it. Small charges here and there, different merchants, different amounts, but always when I was away on business trips or client meetings. Always when I wouldn't notice a few $100s missing here or there. This wasn't Claire's first rodeo. This was just the first time she'd gotten greedy enough to take the bait I dangled in front of her. I made a joke to myself as I drove to Rivera's office. Because humor was the only thing keeping me from driving my car into a wall. 2 tickets to London, I muttered. She must have remembered our anniversary, which was, last decade. Real thoughtful of her. The city traffic was terrible, as always. I sat at red lights and watched people cross the street. Normal people living normal lives, probably not dealing with spouses who were currently planning international fraud trips. I envied them. Then I pulled up the map on my monitoring system one more time and watched the little dots light up like a constellation, a treasure hunt I never signed up for, marking every place my money had gone while I was sitting in a meeting talking about expense reports. The irony wasn't lost on me, not even a little bit. By the time the sun set on what I'm now calling the day my marriage became a federal case, the bait card had racked up $48,700 in charges. 48 grand. In less than 8 hours. That's more than most Americans make in a year, gone faster than you can say identity theft 3 times fast. Hotels that cost more per night than my first car. Dinners at restaurants where the waiters probably have better dental plans than I do. Boutique shopping sprees at places where they don't put price tags on anything, because if you have to ask, you clearly stumbled into the wrong tax bracket. I sat in my home office, the spare bedroom we'd converted when we bought the house, back when we meant something and ours wasn't just a legal term that was about to get really complicated. And I watched the charges roll in like waves hitting a beach during a hurricane. Each alert was another gut punch, another lie exposed, another piece of the life I thought I had crumbling into dust. The transaction log read like someone's fever dream of luxury living. $300 at a wine bar, $1,800 at some designer clothing store I'd never heard of, $2,000 at a jewelry boutique, and sprinkled throughout, smaller charges at coffee shops and restaurants. Like Claire was living out some kind of romantic comedy montage, except the romance was fraud, and the comedy was my complete oblivion to what was happening. One transaction caught my eye because it was so specific, so perfectly detailed in the merchant data. A dinner reservation at Marcello's, this insanely high-end Italian place downtown, where reservations book out 3 months in advance, and the pasta probably costs more than my monthly water bill. The charge was $643. For dinner. 2 people. The transaction detail even included a name on the reservation. Evan. Evan. There he was again. Mr. First-Class Ticket to London himself, now enjoying what I could only assume was some kind of celebratory meal funded entirely by my money. I imagined them sitting there, clinking wine glasses, probably laughing about how easy this all was, how I was just some clueless fraud analyst who couldn't even detect fraud happening in his own wallet. The mental image made me want to throw my laptop through the window, but computers are expensive, and I'd already lost enough money today, so I settled for clenching my jaw so hard I probably could have cracked walnuts. Around 7 p.m., my phone rang. Not an alert this time, an actual call. Claire's face popped up on the screen, the photo I'd taken of her last summer at the beach, smiling and happy, and looking nothing like someone currently committing multiple felonies across state lines. I let it ring twice while I decided how to play this. Answer cheerfully like nothing was wrong. Let it go to voicemail. Answer in character as the clueless husband she clearly thought I was. I went with option 3. Hey babe, I said, injecting just enough warmth into my voice to sound normal, but not so much that I'd have to hate myself later for the performance. Hey honey. Her voice was bright, energetic, practically glowing through the phone. I'm having the most amazing day. Jenna surprised me with a spa retreat, completely last-minute thing. We're at the Serenity Spa downtown. Have you heard of it? It's incredible. They have this hot stone massage that literally melts all your stress away. I bet it does, I thought. Must be really stressful, committing fraud. All that lying and sneaking around probably creates a lot of muscle tension. Thank God my money could pay for someone to rub that guilt right out of your shoulders. That's great, I said, my voice as dry as the Sahara, but apparently Claire was too high on spa treatments and theft to notice. Sounds relaxing. It really is. Jenna's treating me to the whole package. Facials, massage, the works. She's so generous. Claire's voice had that dreamy quality people get when they're really enjoying themselves, completely unaware that their entire world is about to implode. I should be home around 9 or so. Want me to pick up dinner? The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of this woman to spend nearly $50,000 of my money and then offer to pick up dinner on her way home like she was doing me a favor. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that Jenna wasn't treating her to anything, that I knew exactly who was paying for this little spa adventure, and that she should probably enjoy that hot stone massage, because the next place she'd be relaxing was a federal detention center where the amenities were significantly less luxurious. Instead, I said, no thanks. I'll figure something out. Have fun. Love you. She chirped and hung up before I could decide whether to respond. I sat there holding my phone, staring at the screen like it might offer some explanation for how my life had turned into a crime drama. Love you. She'd said it so easily, so casually, like those words still meant something. Like they hadn't become completely meaningless the second she decided to rifle through my bag and steal my identity. I pulled myself together. Professionalism is a hell of a drug, and went back to the transaction logs. Started building a timeline, creating a spreadsheet because that's what you do when your personal life becomes a case file. Date, time, merchant, amount, location. Each row was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. But I needed more than just the bait card data. If I was going to do this right, if I was going to make sure this entire mess resulted in something more than just a divorce and hurt feelings, I needed to dig deeper. I needed to know if this was a pattern, if Claire had done this before, if there were other victims. I started going through our shared accounts, looking back months, bank statements, credit card bills. I pulled up Claire's phone records from our cellular account. We were on a family plan, which meant I had access to call logs and text message metadata. I couldn't see the actual messages, but I could see who she was talking to and when. And guess whose number showed up about 600 times in the last 3 months? Evan. Good old Evan with his wine tastings and his first-class plane tickets funded by my bank account. Then I did something that probably violated about 12 different privacy laws, but at this point I was way past caring about being the good guy. I checked Claire's laptop. She'd left it on the kitchen counter that morning, and we'd always had each other's passwords. One of those couple things that seemed sweet and trusting at the time, but now just seemed stupid. I opened it up, went straight to her email, and started reading. Most of it was boring. Spam emails from stores, newsletter subscriptions, email chains with Jenna about brunch plans and Instagram-worthy restaurants. But then I found a folder, tucked away in her email archive, labeled Travel Ideas. I clicked it open and felt my blood pressure spike into territory that probably required medical attention. Emails. Dozens of them. Booking confirmations for hotels I'd never heard her mention. Flight itineraries to Paris, Barcelona, Miami. All from the last 8 months. All charged to credit cards that I didn't recognize the numbers for. I cross-referenced the dates with my own calendar and realized something that made my hands shake. Every single trip coincided with times I'd been away for work. When I was in Seattle for a conference, she was in Paris. When I was in Boston meeting clients, she was in Barcelona. When I thought she was having quiet weekends at home, she was living it up in South Beach. This wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't Claire finding my bait card and making a stupid impulse decision. This was systematic, practiced, professional almost. She'd been doing this for months, maybe longer, and I'd been completely clueless. I kept digging, found more emails. These ones from someone named Michael Santos at a luxury watch store downtown. Casual, friendly emails thanking Claire for her help with inventory and customer service. Claire had never mentioned working at a watch store. She had a part-time gig doing social media management for a few small businesses, working from home mostly. When had she been helping at a watch store? I Googled the store. Prestige timepieces. High-end luxury watches, the kind that cost more than a semester of college. I looked at their Instagram, their website, their Yelp reviews. And there, buried in a photo from 4 months ago captioned, "Our amazing team," was Claire, standing behind the counter, smiling, wearing a name tag. The pieces started clicking together in my head like the worst puzzle ever. A luxury watch store, where wealthy people come in and buy expensive things and hand over their credit cards to be processed. Where someone working the counter could easily photograph card numbers, expiration dates, security codes. Where someone with access to the transaction system could collect names, addresses, all the information you'd need to commit identity theft on a scale that would make most criminals jealous. I made a joke to Agent Rivera later when I showed her all this information. She always loved designer watches, I said, my voice completely flat. Now she's stealing time. Rivera didn't laugh. She just looked at me with this expression that was half pity, half professional interest, like I was simultaneously a victim and a really fascinating case study. But sitting there in my office that night, laptop open to emails that documented months of fraud, phone still showing alerts from charges that were still rolling in, I didn't feel like joking. I felt like an idiot. A complete, absolute idiot who'd been married to a criminal and never saw it coming, despite the fact that catching criminals was literally my job. Claire came home at 9:15, glowing and relaxed from her spa day, carrying takeout from some trendy place because apparently she'd decided to pick up dinner anyway. She kissed me on the cheek, told me about her amazing afternoon, showed me her nails, freshly manicured, probably another charge I'd find later on the transaction log. I smiled, ate the dinner she brought, made appropriate sounds of interest while she talked. And the whole time, I was thinking about federal prison sentences and asset seizure and how good she was at lying. Because if I hadn't seen the evidence myself, I'd never have known. She was that convincing. The ledger I'd eventually find would tell a bigger story. But that night, With $48,700 gone in a marriage that was already over except for the paperwork, I just sat there and watched my wife describe her perfect day, funded entirely by fraud. Agent Rivera called me at 7:30 the next morning, which is either really early or perfectly reasonable, depending on whether you're a morning person or someone who values sleep like a normal human being. I was already awake, hadn't really slept, to be honest, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, staring at spreadsheets like they might suddenly rearrange themselves into something less devastating. Federal Building, 9 a.m. Bring everything. Her voice had that clipped, efficient quality that government agents develop after years of dealing with bureaucracy and criminals who think they're smarter than the system. No pleasantries. No, how are you holding up? Just straight to business, which honestly I appreciated because I wasn't in the mood for sympathy. The Federal Building was one of those aggressively modern glass structures downtown that looks like someone asked an architect to design intimidation as a physical space, and they absolutely nailed the assignment. Too many windows. Too much natural light. Security checkpoints that make airport TSA look casual. I went through the metal detectors, got my visitor badge, and followed the escort to Rivera's office on the 7th floor. Her office was exactly what you'd expect. Functional, organized, walls covered with commendations and certificates that proved she was very good at catching bad guys. She had one of those massive monitors that showed about 15 different windows of data simultaneously, the kind of setup that makes you either feel like a spy or develop an instant headache. Rivera herself was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who probably saw through every lie you told before you even finished telling it. Coffee, she offered, gesturing to a pot that looked like it had been sitting there since the Clinton administration. I'm good, I said, which was a lie, but I'd learned my lesson about Federal Building coffee during my FBI days. Some mistakes you only make once. I laid out everything on her desk, printed transaction logs, screenshots of the emails, the timeline I'd built showing Claire's trips coordinated with my work travel, photos of her at the watch store, bank statements with highlighted charges. It looked like the evidence board from a crime show, except instead of tracking a serial killer, we were tracking my wife's systematic fraud operation. Rivera went through it methodically, making notes, asking questions, pulling up databases on her computer to cross-reference information. And that's when things got really interesting or really terrible, depending on your perspective. Probably both. This isn't her first rodeo, Rivera said after about 20 minutes of silent review. She turned her monitor toward me, showing a flagged transaction report. We've had alerts on similar patterns before. Different cards, but same geographic markers. Paris, Barcelona, Miami. Luxury hotels, high-end boutiques. The algorithm flagged them as potential fraud rings, but we didn't have enough to build a case. Until now. She pulled up more data. Victim reports from other cardholders who'd noticed unauthorized charges. All the purchases had the same signature. Calculated amounts just under reporting thresholds, luxury merchants, international locations. The kind of fraud that looks almost legitimate if you're not paying close attention, which most people aren't until their credit card bill arrives, and they realize someone charged $8,000 to a hotel in Paris while they were sitting at home in Ohio watching Netflix. Your wife wasn't working alone, Rivera continued, clicking through screens. The watch store, Prestige timepieces, we're going to need to take a hard look at their operation. If she had access to customer card information during transactions, that's a goldmine for someone building a fraud portfolio. I felt sick. Not because I was surprised. At this point, Claire could have told me she was secretly an international spy, and I would have just nodded and added it to the list, but because the scope of this was so much bigger than I'd realized. This wasn't just my wife stealing from me. This was my wife potentially stealing from dozens, maybe hundreds of people. People who'd walked into a luxury watch store, made legitimate purchases, handed over their credit cards, and had no idea that the friendly woman behind the counter was photographing their information for later use. The watch store owner, I said. Michael Santos. Is he involved? Rivera shrugged. That's what we need to find out. Could be complicit. Could be another victim. Could be completely oblivious. We'll bring him in for questioning. She made another note, then looked at me with an expression that was probably meant to be reassuring, but mostly just looked tired. You did good work here, Marcus. I know this is personal, but you documented everything perfectly. Makes my job a hell of a lot easier. Great. I said flatly. Glad my imploding marriage could contribute to your case clearance rate. She almost smiled. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. This sucks. Yeah. I leaned back in the uncomfortable government issue chair. It really does. Rivera outlined the next steps. They'd coordinate with financial crimes units, pull records from the watch store, contact victims, build a comprehensive case. They'd need to move carefully. If Claire suspected she was being investigated, she might run, destroy evidence, alert other people potentially involved in the operation. The London tickets were in 3 days, which gave them a narrow window. We'll flag her at customs, Rivera said. Let her think everything's fine. Let her get on that plane if she tries, and then we pick her up when she lands back in the States. Harder to run when you're already in custody. I nodded, processing the reality that my wife was about to become a federal fugitive risk. That I was sitting in a government building actively helping to build a case against the person I'd promised to love and cherish. That somewhere right now, Claire was probably at home or meeting Evan or planning her next move, completely unaware that everything was about to come crashing down. Rivera walked me out, shook my hand at the elevator, told me she'd be in touch. I rode down 7 floors in silence, walked through the lobby past the security checkpoints, and stepped out into the morning sunshine feeling like I'd just left a different universe. People walked past on the sidewalk, normal people doing normal things, and I wondered if any of them were one bad decision away from having their lives turn into federal cases. I called Michael Santos on the way to my car, kept my voice casual, friendly, like I was just a curious guy asking innocent questions. Hey, this might sound weird, but my wife Claire mentioned she's been helping out at your store. I wanted to maybe surprise her with something. Thought I'd come by. His response told me everything I needed to know. Confusion, hesitation, the sound of someone realizing they'd been played. Claire? She was great. Yeah, helped us during our busy season a few months back. Haven't seen her recently though. Everything okay? Yeah, all good, I lied. Just wanted to check. Thanks, man. I hung up and sat in my car, watching the federal building in my rearview mirror like it might follow me home. Here's something they don't tell you about investigating your own spouse. At some point, you cross a line from gathering evidence into full-blown paranoid detective mode, and there's really no coming back from that. I crossed that line around 10 a.m. on Friday morning when I decided that if Claire had been stupid enough to keep emails documenting her fraud operation, maybe she'd been stupid enough to keep physical records too. Because criminals, even smart ones, have this weird compulsion to document their crimes. It's like they can't help themselves. They keep trophies, journals, spreadsheets. It's a psychological thing that I learned about in my FBI training and have seen play out in about 100 cases since. So I went home during my lunch break, told my assistant I had a dentist appointment, which is the universal excuse for leaving work that nobody ever questions because nobody wants to hear about your dental problems, and I started searching. Not randomly, methodically, like the professional investigator I am. Except now the crime scene was my own bedroom, and that felt about as wrong as you'd imagine. I started with the obvious places. Her desk drawers, nothing but old receipts and makeup samples, and about 40 different pins that probably didn't work. Her closet, just clothes and shoes and a collection of handbags that suddenly seemed a lot more suspicious given what I now knew about her shopping habits. Her nightstand, books, chapstick, one of those sleep masks that blocks out light, completely innocent. Then I moved to her jewelry box. It was one of those fancy wooden ones with multiple compartments and a little ballerina that spins when you open it, which Claire thought was charming and I thought was vaguely creepy in that uncanny valley kind of way. She kept it on her dresser, right out in the open, because why would you hide a jewelry box? It's supposed to be visible. That's where normal people keep their jewelry. Except Claire, as I was learning, was not normal people. I opened the top layer. Earrings, necklaces, a few rings, nothing unusual. Second layer, more of the same, plus a watch I'd given her for our 5th anniversary that apparently wasn't fancy enough because it was still sitting there unworn. Third layer, and this is where things got interesting. I felt something hard underneath the velvet liner. Not jewelry-shaped. Rectangular. Flat. I pulled out the liner, and there it was, a small black notebook. The kind you can buy at any drugstore for $3, completely unassuming. The type of thing that could contain grocery lists or workout routines or literally anything innocent. Except when I opened it, What I found was definitely not a grocery list unless Claire had started shopping for credit card numbers and expiration dates at Whole Foods. Page after page of handwritten entries. Names, card numbers, expiration dates, security codes, cities, dates of use, dollar amounts. It was a ledger, an actual, physical, incredibly incriminating ledger documenting every single fraudulent transaction Claire had made over the past year, maybe longer. I flipped through it, my hands shaking slightly, and felt this bizarre mix of horror and vindication. Horror because, holy hell, my wife was keeping a criminal diary like some kind of delusional accountant. Vindication because this was evidence so solid you could build a house on it. There were at least 40 different cards listed. 40 victims. Names I didn't recognize. Probably people who'd shopped at the watch store and had no idea their information had been compromised. Next to each card number were notations: Paris hotel, Barcelona shopping, Miami restaurants. Like Claire was keeping track of her own personal fraud portfolio for tax purposes or something equally insane. I stood there in my bedroom, holding this notebook, and I couldn't decide whether to laugh or throw something through the window. The sheer audacity of keeping physical records. The complete lack of operational security. This was the kind of mistake that got criminals caught every single day. And Claire had made it with the confidence of someone who genuinely believed she'd never be discovered. I photographed every page, used my phone, made sure the lighting was good, double-checked that every number and notation was clearly visible. Then I texted Rivera. Found something. You're going to want to see this. Her response was immediate. Bring it in. Now. I wrapped the notebook in a plastic bag because I'd watched enough crime shows to know about preserving evidence. Even though this wasn't technically a crime scene, and I probably didn't need to worry about fingerprints since they were definitely Claire's, and I put it in my briefcase like I was carrying nuclear codes. Then I carefully replaced the velvet liner in the jewelry box, closed all the compartments, made sure everything looked exactly like I'd found it. If Claire came home and noticed the notebook was missing, the game would be over before we could coordinate the arrest. On the drive back to the federal building, I called Rivera and gave her the rundown. She briefed me on what they'd found: international transaction alerts, coordination with UK customs, red flags from multiple financial institutions. They'd contacted Michael Santos at the watch store, and he was cooperating fully, which is law enforcement speak for scared out of his mind and telling us everything. Turns out Claire had worked there for 4 months, always volunteering for the register, always friendly with customers, always helpful. The perfect employee. The perfect cover. This ledger, Rivera said when I handed it over in her office 20 minutes later. This is the smoking gun. With this and the transaction data, we have her dead to rights. Interstate fraud, identity theft, probably money laundering given the amounts and international movement. This is federal prison time, Marcus. Years. I nodded, watching her flip through pages, watching her expression shift from professional interest to something closer to amazement. She documented everything, Rivera continued. Every card, every purchase, every trip. It's like she wanted to get caught. She thought she was smarter than everyone else. I said quietly. Thought she'd never get caught because I was too stupid to notice and everyone else was too busy to care. Rivera looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. The Crown Prosecution Service in the UK is going to want copies of this. Those flight tickets, the international purchases, this has jurisdiction implications. You might have just handed us a case that crosses the Atlantic. My ego felt oddly honored by that. My marriage? My marriage felt like it had been run over by a freight train, then backed over for good measure, then set on fire just to make sure it was really dead. But hey, at least I was contributing to international law enforcement cooperation. Silver linings and all that. Rivera coordinated next steps, surveillance on Claire, monitoring of her accounts, preparation for the airport arrest. Everything was moving fast now, the machinery of federal justice grinding into gear. I signed paperwork, gave official statements, became a witness in what was now officially a federal investigation. When I left the federal building that afternoon, the notebook safely in evidence custody, I felt lighter somehow. Like I'd been carrying this weight I didn't even know was there, and finally putting it down. The truth was out there now, documented and photographed and filed away in government databases. Claire's perfect crime, preserved forever in case files and evidence logs. I stopped for coffee on the way home. Actual good coffee from a local place, not federal building sludge, and made a dark joke to the barista without meaning to. "Rough day at work?" she asked, probably because I looked like someone who'd just watched their life implode. "You could say that," I replied. "Found out my wife's been running a fraud operation. But hey, at least she kept good records." The barista laughed nervously, clearly unsure if I was joking. I wasn't sure either, honestly. The line between tragedy and comedy had gotten pretty blurry. Chapter 7. The Sting at the Airport. Waiting for the other shoe to drop is psychological torture. I know this because I spent the next 3 days living in a state of suspended reality where I had to pretend everything was fine while knowing that my wife was about to get arrested at an airport by federal agents. It's like watching a car accident happen in slow motion, except you're also in the car and also the one who called the cops, and also somehow still expected to show up for Thanksgiving dinner and act normal. Claire spent those 3 days packing, cheerfully packing. She'd laid out clothes on the guest bed. Our house has a guest bed that nobody ever uses except apparently for organizing international fraud trips. And she kept asking me questions like, does London get cold in November? And should I bring the blue dress or the black one? And I'd sit there, coffee in hand, soul slowly dying, and say things like, definitely the blue one, while internally screaming. She showed me the itinerary she'd printed out. First-class tickets, my money. 5-star hotel in Kensington, also my money. Dinner reservations at restaurants I couldn't pronounce, you guessed it, my money. She was planning this trip with the enthusiasm of someone who'd won a vacation sweepstakes, not someone who'd funded it through systematic identity theft. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. "I'm so excited," she said on Sunday night, 2 days before the flight. "Jenna's never been to London. It's going to be amazing." Still using Jenna as cover. Still lying with the ease of someone who'd been practicing for months. I wanted to tell her that Jenna wasn't going, that Evan was, that I knew everything. But Rivera had been crystal clear. Act normal. Don't tip her off. Let her get comfortable. The arrest would be clean and public and impossible to run from. Monday morning, Claire texted me pictures. Her at the spa getting her nails done, getting London ready. Smoothies from some overpriced juice bar, pre-travel detox. A rooftop sunset photo. Last Austin sunset before the trip. Each photo felt like a mockery. Like she was documenting her own crime spree in real time and posting it for the world to see. I responded with thumbs-up emojis and smiley faces while forwarding every single image to Rivera for the case file. Agent Rivera coordinated with TSA and Customs at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. They flagged Claire's ticket, set up secondary inspection, prepared the arrest protocol. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Let her check in normally, go through security, get comfortable. Then, at the gate, pull her for random additional screening and execute the arrest away from crowds. Clean, efficient, minimal scene. The kind of operation that happens at airports every day without most travelers even noticing. Tuesday morning, flight day. I woke up at 5 a.m. even though my alarm wasn't set until 6. Couldn't sleep. Just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to Claire move around the house, dragging her suitcase, checking and rechecking her passport. The passport she'd been studying in my gym bag weeks ago. Everything had led to this moment, and now that it was here, I felt weirdly empty. Not angry anymore. Not betrayed. Just tired. "You sure you don't want to drive me?" Claire asked at the door, her suitcase packed with clothes bought with stolen money, her ticket funded by fraud, her entire trip built on a foundation of felonies. "Big client meeting this morning." I lied smoothly, because I'd gotten pretty good at lying over the past week too. "Text me when you land." She kissed me goodbye. Actually kissed me. On the lips. Like we were a normal couple saying normal goodbyes before a normal trip. "Love you," she said. I didn't say it back. Just smiled and waved as she got into her Uber. Because of course, she wasn't driving herself. Why leave a car at the airport when you can charge the ride to someone else's card and watch the car pull away? Then I got in my own car and drove to the airport because Rivera had invited me to watch from the security office, and there was no way in hell I was missing this. The TSA security office at Austin Bergstrom is in a part of the airport regular travelers never see. Behind the scenes, up some stairs, through doors that require badges and security clearance. Rivera met me there, along with 2 other agents whose names I immediately forgot because my brain was running on adrenaline and spite at this point. The office had monitors showing every security checkpoint, every gate, every corner of the terminal. Big Brother had nothing on airport surveillance. We watched Claire check in at the British Airways counter. She was wearing the blue dress. Good choice, I thought bitterly. She smiled at the ticket agent, probably made small talk, got her boarding pass and baggage claim tickets. Everything normal. Everything routine. She's traveling alone? One of the agents asked, checking his notes. Supposed to be meeting someone at the gate, Rivera explained. The boyfriend. He's got a separate ticket, different confirmation number. We'll pick him up too. Supposed to be meeting someone at the gate, Rivera explained. The boyfriend. He's got a separate ticket, different confirmation number. We'll pick him up too. I watched Claire go through TSA pre-check. Because of course she had pre-check, probably signed up using one of her stolen cards, and breezed through security with the ease of someone who travels frequently. She grabbed her bag from the conveyor belt, slipped her shoes back on, and headed toward her gate like she didn't have a care in the world. Then I saw Evan. He showed up about 15 minutes later, also checking in, also going through security, also completely oblivious. He was wearing one of those expensive casual outfits that screams, I have money, but I'm trying to look approachable. Designer jeans, button-down shirt, leather jacket that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. I hated him on principle, but I also felt a tiny bit sorry for him because he clearly had no idea what he was walking into. They met at the gate. I watched on the monitors as Claire lit up when she saw him, as they hugged, as they sat down in the gate area and talked and laughed like they were about to have the adventure of a lifetime. Which, I guess in a way they were, just not the kind they were expecting. Rivera checked her watch. Customs is ready. TSA's in position. We move in 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. I watched Claire sip her coffee, airport coffee, which she usually hated, but today apparently it was fine. Watched Evan scroll through his phone. Watched other passengers board the flight. Normal people taking normal trips, completely unaware that in a few minutes, 2 of their fellow passengers were about to be arrested by federal agents. Now, Rivera said quietly into her radio. 2 TSA agents approached Claire and Evan. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see their body language. Professional, calm, no drama. Claire looked confused. Evan looked annoyed. They both stood up, grabbed their carry-ons, and followed the agents toward a side corridor away from the main gate area. That's when the customs officers moved in. Badge flash. Handcuffs. The universal, you're under arrest, posture that every cop in the world seems to know instinctively. Claire's face went from confused to shocked to terrified in about 3 seconds. Evan just looked stunned, like his brain was still trying to process what was happening. I stood there in the security office, watching on monitors, and I felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just this weird sense of finality. Like closing a book you didn't particularly enjoy, but felt obligated to finish anyway. Rivera glanced at me. You okay? Yeah, I said, and it was true. I was okay. Not great. Not happy. But okay. Can I go now? She nodded. We'll need you for testimony eventually, but for now, you're done. Good work. I left the airport through the back way, avoiding the terminal entirely, and drove home in silence. When I got there, the house felt different. Quieter, emptier, but also somehow cleaner, like someone had opened all the windows and let out air that had been stale for years. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't check my phone for fraud alerts. Didn't monitor transactions. Didn't worry about what Claire was doing, or where she was, or whose money she was spending. The alerts had stopped. The case was closed. The rest was just paperwork. Hashtag Chapter 7, the sting at the airport. Waiting for the other shoe to drop is psychological torture. I know this because I spent the next 3 days living in a state of suspended reality where I had to pretend everything was fine while knowing that my wife was about to get arrested at an airport by federal agents. It's like watching a car accident happen in slow motion, except you're also in the car, and also the one who called the cops, and also somehow still expected to show up for Thanksgiving dinner and act normal. Claire spent those 3 days packing, cheerfully packing. She'd laid out clothes on the guest bed. Our house has a guest bed that nobody ever uses except apparently for organizing international fraud trips. And she kept asking me questions like, does London get cold in November? And should I bring the blue dress or the black one? And I'd sit there, coffee in hand, soul slowly dying, and say things like, definitely the blue one, while internally screaming. She showed me the itinerary she'd printed out. First-class tickets, my money. Five-star hotel in Kensington, also my money. Dinner reservations at restaurants I couldn't pronounce, you guessed it, my money. She was planning this trip with the enthusiasm of someone who'd won a vacation sweepstakes, not someone who'd funded it through systematic identity theft. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. I'm so excited, she said on Sunday night, 2 days before the flight. Jenna's never been to London. It's going to be amazing. Still using Jenna as cover. Still lying with the ease of someone who'd been practicing for months. I wanted to tell her that Jenna wasn't going, that Evan was, that I knew everything. But Rivera had been crystal clear. Act normal. Don't tip her off. Let her get comfortable. The arrest would be clean and public and impossible to run from. Monday morning, Claire texted me pictures. Her at the spa getting her nails done, getting London ready. Smoothies from some overpriced juice bar, pre-travel detox. A rooftop sunset photo. Last Austin sunset before the trip. Each photo felt like a mockery. Like she was documenting her own crime spree in real time and posting it for the world to see. I responded with thumb. The TSA security office at Austin Bergstrom is in a part of the airport regular travelers never see. Behind the scenes, up some stairs, through doors that require badges and security clearance. Rivera met me there, along with 2 other agents whose names I immediately forgot because my brain was running on adrenaline and spite at this point. The office had monitors showing every security checkpoint, every gate, every corner of the terminal. Big Brother had nothing on airport surveillance. We watched Claire check in at the British Airways counter. She was wearing the blue dress. Good choice, I thought bitterly. She smiled at the ticket agent, probably made small talk, got her boarding pass and baggage claim tickets. Everything normal. Everything routine. She's traveling alone? One of the agents asked, checking his notes. Supposed to be meeting someone at the gate, Rivera explained. The boyfriend. He's got a separate ticket, different confirmation number. We'll pick him up too. I watched Claire go through TSA pre-check. Because of course she had pre-check, probably signed up using one of her stolen cards, and breezed through security with the ease of someone who travels frequently. She grabbed her bag from the conveyor belt, slipped her shoes back on, and headed toward her gate like she didn't have a care in the world. Then I saw Evan. He showed up about 15 minutes later, also checking in, also going through security, also completely oblivious. He was wearing one of those expensive casual outfits that screams, I have money, but I'm trying to look approachable. Designer jeans, button-down shirt, leather jacket that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. I hated him on principle, but I also felt a tiny bit sorry for him because he clearly had no idea what he was walking into. They met at the gate. I watched on the monitors as Claire lit up when she saw him, as they hugged, as they sat down in the gate area and talked and laughed like they were about to have the adventure of a lifetime. Which, I guess in a way they were, just not the kind they were expecting. Rivera checked her watch. Customs is ready. TSA's in position. We move in 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. I watched Claire sip her coffee, airport coffee, which she usually hated, but today apparently it was fine. Watched Evan scroll through his phone. Watched other passengers board the flight. Normal people taking normal trips, completely unaware that in a few minutes, 2 of their fellow passengers were about to be arrested by federal agents. Now, Rivera said quietly into her radio. 2 TSA agents approached Claire and Evan. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see their body language. Professional, calm, no drama. Claire looked confused. Evan looked annoyed. They both stood up, grabbed their carry-ons, and followed the agents toward a side corridor away from the main gate area. That's when the customs officers moved in. Badge flash. Handcuffs. The universal, you're under arrest, posture that every cop in the world seems to know instinctively. Claire's face went from confused to shocked to terrified in about 3 seconds. Evan just looked stunned, like his brain was still trying to process what was happening. I stood there in the security office, watching on monitors, and I felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just this weird sense of finality. Like closing a book you didn't particularly enjoy, but felt obligated to finish anyway. Rivera glanced at me. You okay? Yeah, I said, and it was true. I was okay. Not great. Not happy. But okay. Can I go now? She nodded. We'll need you for testimony eventually, but for now, you're done. Good work. I left the airport through the back way, avoiding the terminal entirely, and drove home in silence. When I got there, The house felt different. Quieter. Emptier. But also somehow cleaner, like someone had opened all the windows and let out air that had been stale for years. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't check my phone for fraud alerts. Didn't monitor transactions. Didn't worry about what Claire was doing, or where she was, or whose money she was spending. The alerts had stopped. The case was closed. The rest was just paperwork. Hashtag Chapter 8, arrest and the phone call. They took Claire to the Travis County Jail first. Standard procedure for federal arrests made at the airport. It's this massive concrete complex off Highway 183 that looks exactly like what you'd imagine a jail to look like. Gray, depressing, surrounded by chain-link fences and security cameras. The kind of place where hope goes to die. I didn't go there. Didn't want to. Rivera called me around 2 p.m. to confirm the arrest had been processed, and Claire was officially in custody. She asked for her phone call, Rivera said. Fair warning. She'll probably try you first. I said thanks and hung up. Then I sat there staring at my phone like it was a live grenade, waiting for it to ring. It took about 45 minutes. When Claire's name popped up on my screen, except it wasn't her phone, it was the jail's number with her name attached, because that's how those systems work. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted her to sweat a little. Maybe I was just delaying the inevitable. Maybe I'm petty and vindictive and turning into the kind of person who enjoys watching people squirm. Probably all 3. Broken. Human. And I hated that some part of me still felt something when I heard it. Yeah, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Not warm. Not cold. Just flat. Marcus, there's been a mistake. They arrested me. At the airport. They think I stole credit cards or something. It's insane. I need you to call a lawyer. Tell them you gave me permission to use your card. Tell them. Claire. I cut her off, and the silence that followed was so heavy I could practically feel it through the phone. Stop talking. But Marcus, you don't understand. No, you don't understand. I stood up, started pacing my kitchen because sitting still was impossible. They didn't arrest you because they think you stole credit cards. They arrested you because you did steal credit cards. 40 of them. Maybe more. They have evidence. Logs. Transaction data. A ledger with your handwriting documenting every single fraudulent purchase you made over the past year. The silence this time was different. The kind of silence that happens when someone realizes the walls are closing in and there's no way out. I could hear her breathing, sharp and panicked, and I knew she was doing the math in her head, trying to figure out how I knew, how they knew, how everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. Marcus, please. Save your breath for your lawyer, I said, and my voice came out colder than I intended. Or maybe exactly as cold as I intended. Hard to tell at this point. You're going to need it. You can't do this to me. I'm your wife. The audacity. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of playing the wife card after everything she'd done. I laughed. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because what else was I supposed to do? Cry? Scream? Throw my phone across the room? You stopped being my wife the second you decided to rifle through my bag and steal my identity, I said. Everything after that, that was just you digging the hole deeper. And I gave you the shovel. What are you talking about? The bait card, Claire. The one you found in my gym bag. The one with $57,000 on it. The one you used to buy hotel rooms and spa treatments and first-class tickets to London. That was a trap. I said it. You took it. And now you're exactly where you belong. I could hear her start to cry. Real tears, not the manipulative kind she'd probably used on me 1,000 times before without me noticing. These sounded genuine. Desperate. The sound of someone's entire world collapsing in real time. And I felt nothing. Well, not nothing. I felt tired. Exhausted. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long that setting it down just made me realize how much damage it had done. I'm sorry, she whispered. Marcus, I'm so sorry. I never meant. I didn't think. You didn't think you'd get caught. I finished for her. None of you ever do. That's why people like me have jobs. I hung up before she could say anything else. Didn't give her the satisfaction of a goodbye. Didn't give her another second of my time. Just ended the call and blocked the jail's number because if she tried calling back, I didn't want to know about it. The house was quiet. That specific kind of quiet that happens when something significant has ended and you're just sitting in the aftermath, trying to figure out what comes next. I made a sandwich, turkey and cheese, nothing fancy, and ate it standing at the counter because sitting at the table felt too formal for the weird limbo state I was currently occupying. Not married, but not divorced. Not single, but definitely alone. Some kind of relationship purgatory that didn't have a clear label. My phone buzzed. Not Claire this time. A text from Rivera. Arraignment tomorrow morning. Federal courthouse. 9 a.m. You don't have to be there, but figured I'd let you know. I texted back. Thanks. I'll pass. I didn't want to see her in an orange jumpsuit. Didn't want to watch her stand before a judge and enter a plea. Didn't want to be anywhere near the legal circus that was about to unfold. I'd done my part. Gathered the evidence. Built the case. Handed it over to people whose job it was to handle the rest. My involvement was done, at least for now. Eventually, I'd have to testify, give depositions, probably relive this entire nightmare in front of lawyers and juries. But that was future Marcus's problem. Present Marcus just wanted to exist in the quiet for a while. Around 6 p.m., people started calling. My mom, who somehow already knew even though I definitely hadn't told her. Claire's sister, demanding to know what was happening and why I wasn't helping. A few friends who'd seen something on social media, because apparently someone at the airport had filmed the arrest and posted it online, because that's the world we live in now, where everyone's personal tragedy becomes content. I ignored all of them, let them go to voicemail, turned my phone on silent, and left it face down on the counter. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and about 30 text messages. News of Claire's arrest had spread through our social circle like wildfire. Everyone wanted details. Everyone had opinions. Everyone suddenly had a story about how they always knew something was off about Claire, which was hilarious because not a single one of these people had mentioned anything when it would have actually been useful. Someone from the watch store called too. Not Michael Santos, but some other employee, asking if I knew what was happening because the FBI had shown up and started interviewing staff. I didn't call back. That wasn't my circus anymore. That was federal investigation territory, and I was officially just a civilian witness trying to figure out how to move forward. The weirdest call came from Jenna, Claire's best friend, the one whose lifestyle Claire had been so desperate to emulate. She left a voicemail. Marcus, I had no idea. I swear to God, I didn't know what she was doing. Please call me back. Please. I believed her. Mostly. Jenna was shallow and materialistic and probably not someone I'd choose to hang out with voluntarily, but I didn't think she was a criminal. Just oblivious. Just someone who lived in a bubble of privilege and never bothered to ask where the money came from, because why would she? When you're used to luxury, you stop questioning it. I spent the day doing absolutely nothing productive. Watched TV, scrolled through my phone, ordered takeout, existed in this weird state of suspended animation where my old life was over, but my new life hadn't started yet. Somewhere across town, Claire was sitting in a jail cell, probably still trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. And I was sitting in a house that felt too big and too empty, trying to figure out what comes after happily ever after ends in federal prison. Federal courthouses have a very specific aesthetic that I like to call aggressive neutrality. Everything is beige or gray or some other color that couldn't offend anyone if it tried. The floors are polished to a shine that probably violates some kind of reflection safety code. The security is tighter than airport TSA, which is saying something considering I just watched my wife get arrested at an airport. And the whole place has this smell. Not bad, just institutional, like cleaning products and old paper and the accumulated anxiety of everyone who's ever walked through those doors knowing their life was about to change. I showed up to Claire's arraignment on Wednesday morning wearing my best suit, which felt weirdly performative considering I wasn't the one on trial. But Agent Rivera had suggested I look presentable since there might be media, and sure enough, there were 2 news vans parked outside with reporters doing that thing where they stand in front of cameras and try to look serious while talking about local crime. I avoided them, slipped in through a side entrance that Rivera had told me about, the one that courthouse regulars use to avoid the circus. The courtroom was exactly what you'd expect if you've ever watched Law and Order or any other legal drama, except somehow more boring and more intimidating at the same time. Wood paneling everywhere. An American flag that looked like it had been there since the building opened in 1987. Rows of benches that were specifically designed to be uncomfortable so nobody got too relaxed while justice was being served. I sat in the gallery, 3rd row back, trying to be invisible and probably failing because I was literally the victim and key witness in this case. Claire was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit that did not I'm sorry to say, compliment her complexion. She looked tired, scared. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wasn't wearing makeup, which for Claire was the equivalent of showing up naked. She'd always been meticulous about her appearance. Always. And now she was standing in federal court looking like someone who'd spent the night in county lockup because, well, she had. Our eyes met for maybe half a second. She looked at me with this expression that was part betrayal, part desperation, part, how could you do this to me? Which was rich considering what she'd done to me. I looked away, studied the wood paneling, counted ceiling tiles, anything to avoid engaging with the woman who'd been my wife and was now federal defendant number something or other. Evan was arraigned separately, different time slot, which I was grateful for because I really didn't want to sit through two of these. One was plenty. One was more than enough emotional devastation for a Wednesday morning. The assistant U.S. attorney handling the case was a woman named Dana Ortiz who looked like she'd been born in a suit and probably dreamed in legal citations. She was in her early 40s, no-nonsense haircut, the kind of prosecutor who'd seen every excuse and heard every sob story and stopped being impressed by either about 15 years ago. She laid out the charges with the efficiency of someone reading a grocery list, except the items on this list were felonies that carried serious prison time. Credit card fraud across state lines, identity theft involving more than 40 victims, money laundering through international transactions, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. She listed them calmly, methodically, like she was describing the weather and not the systematic destruction of multiple people's financial lives. The government has substantial evidence, including transaction records, physical documentation kept by the defendant, witness testimony from the watch store where the defendant obtained card information, and cooperation from the primary victim, the defendant's husband. That last part, the defendant's husband, hit differently hearing it said out loud in federal court. That was me. I was the primary victim. Not just a victim, the primary one. The star witness in my own marriage's destruction. Claire's defense attorney was a public defender who looked about 12 years old and completely overwhelmed. He tried. Give him credit, he tried. He argued that Claire had ties to the community, no prior record, wasn't a flight risk despite being arrested literally, trying to board an international flight. He painted her as a good person who made bad choices, someone who deserved a chance to remain free while awaiting trial. Ortiz countered with the ledger. The beautiful, incriminating, incredibly stupid ledger that Claire had kept in her jewelry box like some kind of criminal scrapbook. Your Honor, the defendant kept detailed records of her crimes. 43 separate credit card numbers. Dates of use spanning 8 months. Transactions in Paris, Barcelona, Miami, and multiple domestic locations. This isn't a one-time mistake. This is systematic, premeditated fraud. The defendant was arrested with first-class tickets to London, purchased with stolen funds, planning to continue this pattern internationally. She poses a significant flight risk and has demonstrated continued criminal behavior right up until her arrest. Judge Morales, older guy, probably late 60s, with reading glasses that he kept adjusting while reviewing documents, listened to both sides with the expression of someone who'd heard these arguments 1,000 times. When the defense finished, when Ortiz finished, when all the legal posturing was done, he looked at Claire directly. Ms. Hale, the evidence presented suggests a pattern of deliberate criminal activity over an extended period. You maintained records of your offenses. You used your position of trust at a luxury retail establishment to obtain personal information from customers. You made substantial purchases using stolen financial information across multiple states and were planning international travel funded by these illegal activities. The government has demonstrated both the seriousness of the charges and the risk you pose. Bail is denied. You'll remain in federal custody pending trial. The gavel came down. That sound, that sharp crack of wood on wood, felt final in a way that nothing else had. Not the arrest, not the phone call, not even finding the ledger. That gavel sound was the punctuation mark at the end of a sentence that had been running on way too long. Claire's face crumpled. She turned to her lawyer, said something I couldn't hear, probably asking what this meant or how to appeal or whether there was any way out of this. There wasn't. I knew the system. I knew how this worked. Once bail is denied in federal court, you're done. You sit in custody and you wait for trial, and you hope your lawyer is better at their job than the prosecutor. And if the prosecutor is Dana Ortiz, well, Good luck with that. They led Claire out through a side door. The one defendants use when they're going back to lockup instead of walking out free. She didn't look at me again. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe it hurt too much. Maybe she'd finally realized that the husband she'd been stealing from was also the husband who documented everything and handed it over to federal agents, and was now sitting in court watching her bail get denied. I stayed in my seat while the courtroom cleared out. Other cases were scheduled. Other people's lives were about to get legally complicated. The system moved on. It always does. Justice is a conveyor belt. Cases come in one end, verdicts come out the other, and nobody stops to ask if the people involved are okay because the system doesn't care if you're okay. It cares if you're guilty or innocent. And even then it mostly just cares about processing the paperwork efficiently. Agent Rivera found me in the hallway outside. You good? Define good, I said, which was becoming my standard response to that question. Fair enough. She had a folder under her arm, probably more case documents, more evidence that would eventually be used to ensure Claire spent a significant portion of her life in federal prison. The watch store owner is cooperating. We've identified 37 victims so far from the ledger, contacted most of them. Few more might come forward once the media coverage hits. This is going to be a solid case. Great, I said flatly. Glad my marriage imploding could contribute to your conviction rate. I'd made that joke before, but it still felt appropriate. Maybe it would always feel appropriate. Maybe years from now I'd still be making bitter jokes about how my wife went to prison and all I got was this lousy witness statement. For what it's worth, Rivera said, her voice softer than usual, you did the right thing. I know that doesn't help now, but you did. I nodded because what else was there to say? Yeah, I did the right thing. I caught the criminal. I documented the evidence. I helped build the case. And in the process, I destroyed my marriage, lost my wife. Not that I wanted to keep her at this point, and became the guy whose story people would tell at dinner parties as a cautionary tale. You think your spouse might be sketchy? Let me tell you about this guy I heard about. The media caught me on the way out. Reporters with microphones and cameras, asking how I felt, what I thought about the charges, whether I'd suspected anything. I gave them nothing. Just walked past with my head down, got in my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a solid 5 minutes trying to remember how to breathe normally. My phone buzzed. Text from Michael Santos at the watch store. Saw the news. I'm so sorry. Had no idea she was using customer information. We've implemented new security protocols. If you ever want to talk. I didn't respond. What would I even say? Thanks for being the unwitting accomplice in my wife's fraud ring. Really appreciate how your employment practices enabled systematic identity theft. Yeah, that would go over well. I drove home through midday traffic, radio off, just the sound of the engine and the road and my own thoughts. The house was still quiet when I got there. Still empty. Still waiting for something to fill the space Claire used to occupy. I made coffee. Always coffee, the universal solution to problems that coffee definitely could not solve, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. Started looking at the practical things. Divorce lawyers. Asset division. How to legally separate from someone who's in federal custody. The romance was dead, but the paperwork was very much alive and apparently complicated as hell. Nothing says moving on with your life, quite like Googling how to divorce someone in prison at 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. The ledger had told its tale. The courtroom had rendered its judgment. Claire would sit in federal custody, probably for months before trial, definitely for years after conviction. And I would sit here, in this house, in this life, and figure out what comes next when the person you built everything with turns out to be someone you never really knew at all. The thing about federal cases is they take forever. Not movie forever, where everything wraps up in 2 hours with a dramatic courtroom revelation and someone crying on the witness stand. Real forever. The kind of forever where months pass and lawyers file motions and discovery happens and you start to forget what your life was like before everything became depositions and court dates and emails from prosecutors asking you to clarify testimony you gave 6 weeks ago. Claire pleaded guilty 4 months after her arrest. Not because she had some come-to-Jesus moment where she realized the error of her ways and wanted to make things right. She pleaded guilty because Dana Ortiz had built a case so airtight you could store leftovers in it. And even Claire's public defender, who'd been replaced by a slightly more experienced public defender after the first one basically admitted he was in over his head, knew that going to trial would just make everything worse. I wasn't there for the plea hearing. Didn't want to be. Rivera called me afterwards, gave me the rundown. Claire had stood in front of Judge Morales, answered his questions in that quiet voice people use when they're admitting to crimes that will define the rest of their life, and formally pleaded guilty to credit card fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. 3 felonies. The kind that don't go away. The kind that follow you forever, show up on background checks, make employers nervous, turn you into a cautionary tale at fraud prevention seminars. Sentencing came 2 months after that. This time I showed up, not because I wanted to see Claire, but because I felt like I owed it to the 43 victims whose card information she'd stolen and used. Someone should be there representing all the people whose lives she'd messed up while funding her luxury lifestyle fantasy. The courtroom was the same. Same beige walls, same uncomfortable benches, same American flag. But this time it felt heavier somehow. More final. Arraignment is just the beginning. Sentencing is the end. This was the last chapter, the closing argument, the part where everyone finds out exactly how much justice costs in years and dollars. Claire looked different. Prison had done that thing prison does, made her smaller somehow, like she'd been physically diminished by concrete walls and fluorescent lights and the reality of being federal inmate number whatever. She'd lost weight. Her hair was shorter, practical, none of the style perfection she used to maintain. The orange jumpsuit had become almost normal on her, which was maybe the saddest thing I'd noticed. Dana Ortiz presented the sentencing recommendation with her usual efficiency. Your Honor, the defendant engaged in systematic fraud over a period of at least 8 months, potentially longer. She exploited her position at Prestige Timepieces to obtain personal information from 43 victims. She used stolen credit card information to fund an extravagant lifestyle, including international travel, luxury accommodations, designer purchases, and high-end dining. The total amount of fraudulent charges exceeds $200,000 across all victims. $200,000. I'd known the number was high, but hearing it said out loud in federal court made it real in a way that spreadsheets never had. Claire had stolen $200,000 from regular people. From customers who'd walked into a watch store, made legitimate purchases, and had no idea the woman behind the counter was memorizing their card details for later exploitation. Ortiz continued. The government recommends a sentence of 7 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Additionally, we're seeking full restitution to all victims, plus penalties and fees. The defendant showed sophistication in her crimes, kept detailed records, and continued her criminal behavior right up until arrest. She demonstrates a clear pattern of calculated fraud and showed no remorse until faced with overwhelming evidence. 7 years. 7 years in federal prison. I did the math automatically. She'd be 45 when she got out, assuming good behavior and all that. Mid-40s with a felony record and no job prospects and a lifetime of explaining to potential employers why there's a 7-year gap in her resume that coincides with her time as a federal inmate. The defense attorney talked about Claire's lack of prior record, her cooperation after arrest, the difficult childhood she'd had, which was news to me, and I'd been married to her for 7 years, so either it was a lie or she'd never felt like sharing. He painted her as someone who'd made terrible mistakes but deserved a chance at rehabilitation. Asked for a reduced sentence, maybe 5 years. Pleaded for mercy in that way defense attorneys do when they know the evidence is terrible, but they have to say something. Judge Morales listened, reviewed documents, adjusted his glasses, and then he spoke, addressing Claire directly. Ms. Hale, you engaged in a calculated scheme to defraud dozens of victims. You abused a position of trust. You maintained detailed records of your criminal activity, suggesting both premeditation and sophistication. The harm you caused is substantial. Not just financial harm, though that alone is significant, but the violation of trust, the invasion of privacy, the ongoing impact on victims who must now monitor their credit, change their accounts, live with the knowledge that their personal information was compromised. He paused, letting that sink in. However, I note your guilty plea, your lack of criminal history, and your stated remorse, though the court questions the sincerity given the extended duration of your offenses. Then came the hammer. I sentence you to 6 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay full restitution to all identified victims, totaling $214,000, plus court fees and penalties. During supervised release, you will be prohibited from working in any capacity that involves handling financial transactions or personal information. You will submit to regular monitoring and reporting. Any violation of these terms will result in immediate incarceration. 6 years. Not 7, but close enough. 6 years of Claire's life gone. 6 years in federal prison, which from everything I knew about the system would be medium security, probably somewhere in Texas or maybe Oklahoma. Not the dangerous kind of prison you see in movies, but not summer camp either. Just years of structured monotony, the slow grind of time served. The reality of consequences finally catching up with choices. They led her away. She didn't look at me this time either. Maybe she'd finally accepted that whatever we'd had was over. That the man she'd married and the man who'd helped send her to prison were the same person, and that paradox was too complicated to process while wearing handcuffs. The restitution part was almost funny in a dark way. $214,000. Claire didn't have $214,000. She'd spent it all on the lifestyle she was trying to maintain, which meant she'd be making payments probably for the rest of her life, assuming she ever got a job that paid more than minimum wage with a felony record. The victims would get their money back eventually through the federal restitution system, but Claire would be paying that debt until she was old and gray. I left the courthouse and the media was there again, but this time I was ready. I made a brief statement, something about justice being served, hoping other victims could find closure, standard stuff that wouldn't come back to haunt me. Then I got in my car and drove, not home, but just drove. Ended up at a coffee shop across town, ordered something complicated with too many adjectives, and sat by the window watching normal people live normal lives. Michael Santos called me a few days later. The watch store had been investigated thoroughly, new security protocols implemented, staff retrained. He was embarrassed, apologetic, kept saying he had no idea what Claire had been doing. I believed him. Sometimes the criminals are just better at hiding than the honest people are at looking. He asked if I'd be willing to consult on their new security measures. I said maybe. Haven't followed up yet. Might never. Jenna called too, which was unexpected. She'd apparently had no idea what Claire was doing, had believed all the lies about Jenna treating her to trips and spa days. She cried on the phone, apologized for being the unwitting cover story, asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, which was becoming my automatic response to that question even when it wasn't remotely true. She offered to meet for coffee. I politely declined. Some connections are better left severed. I moved out 8 months after the sentencing. Not because I had to. The house was mine, legally speaking, part of the divorce settlement that went through while Claire was in federal prison, but because I couldn't live there anymore. Every room had memories. Every piece of furniture had a story. The whole place felt haunted by the ghost of a marriage that had died months ago, but was still decomposing in the corners. Found a smaller place across town. 1-bedroom apartment, minimal furniture, the kind of space that didn't have room for baggage either physical or emotional. Started over from scratch. New job too. Took a position with a cybersecurity firm that specialized in helping fraud victims protect their information. Used my story in the interview. They loved it. Nothing says qualified fraud analyst quite like caught my own wife running an identity theft ring. I kept the bait card. Well, not physically. The actual card was evidence, locked away in some federal storage facility. But I kept a digital copy of all the transaction data, screenshots of every alert, the complete timeline of how I caught her. Saved it in a folder on my laptop labeled Never Again. Sometimes late at night, when I can't sleep and the apartment is too quiet, I open that folder and look through it. Not because I miss her. Not because I regret what I did. But because I need to remember that sometimes the person closest to you is the one you should trust the least. Claire writes me letters occasionally. They get forwarded through my lawyer because I've made it clear I don't want direct contact. She apologizes, explains, tries to make me understand why she did what she did. I don't read them anymore. Read the first few, then stopped. There's nothing she can say that would change anything. No explanation that would make $200,000 in fraud somehow acceptable. No apology that would undo the year of lies and systematic theft. The story made it into fraud prevention training programs after all. Not from me. I still haven't agreed to Michael Santos's request, but from other sources. Federal agents use it as a teaching tool. Security firms reference it in their materials. Someone even wrote a blog post about it that went semi-viral in cybersecurity circles. The fraud analyst who caught his own wife. I'm internet famous in the most depressing way possible. My friends ask if I'll date again. Eventually, maybe. When I can think about trust without my stomach turning. When I can look at someone smile without wondering what they're hiding. When normal relationship concerns like, do they like me, aren't immediately followed by, are they planning to steal my identity? Therapy helps. I go once a week, talk about betrayal and trust issues and how to rebuild a life after the foundation cracks. The therapist is good. She doesn't judge, just listens and occasionally points out when I'm being too hard on myself, which is often. I sleep better now. The apartment doesn't have the same ghosts. The silence is just silence, not the oppressive weight of lies and secrets. I wake up and check my phone, and there are no fraud alerts because the only person who is defrauding me is currently in federal prison in Fort Worth, serving year 2 of 6. Final thought, the one I come back to when I'm trying to make sense of everything. Claire thought London would change her life. Thought those first-class tickets and that luxury hotel and all those stolen moments of pretend wealth would somehow transform her into the person she wanted to be. She was right about the life-changing part, just wrong about the direction. London didn't make her rich and fabulous. London, or more specifically, trying to get to London on stolen money, changed her address from a comfortable suburban house to federal prison unit C block. Same transformation, different destination. Funny how that works. I still have the bait card data, my monument to one of the dumbest, most stylish crimes I've ever tracked. Sometimes I look at it and laugh. Sometimes I look at it and feel sad. Mostly I just look at it and remember that justice isn't always satisfying. Truth isn't always healing. And sometimes doing the right thing just means you get to be the guy who sent his wife to prison and has to live with that forever. But at least I sleep at night. And in federal prison somewhere in Texas. Maybe Claire finally does too.